Chapter 1. The 13th birthday. Harry could have pretended it was just another ordinary day. It would have been easier, really, to ignore the date circled in red on the calendar he kept hidden beneath his loose floorboard, to let July 31st pass unmarked like any other summer day, trapped in his bedroom at No. 4 Privet Drive. But the ache in his chest wouldn't let him forget, and neither would the careful way Hedwig had been watching him for the past week. The morning light filtered through his grimy window, casting long shadows across the cramped space he'd called home for far too many summers. Harry sat on the edge of his bed, still in his oversized pajamas that had once belonged to Dudley, and stared at the beautiful snowy owl perched on the back of his desk chair. Hedwig's amber eyes seemed unusually intense today, almost human in their concern, and she hadn't touched the dead mouse he'd managed to smuggle up to her the night before. "Happy birthday to me," he whispered, his voice cracking slightly. 13 years old. A teenager now, though he felt simultaneously ancient and impossibly young. The weight of everything that had happened at Hogwarts over the past 2 years pressed down on his shoulders like a physical thing. Hedwig hooted softly, a sound that somehow managed to convey both sympathy and something else Harry couldn't quite identify. She ruffled her pristine white feathers and fixed him with that penetrating stare again. Harry had always known his owl was unusually intelligent, even for a magical creature, but lately her behavior had been borderline unsettling. She'd taken to perching closer to him when he slept, as if standing guard, and yesterday he could have sworn she'd deliberately knocked his history of magic textbook off his desk, just as he was about to fall asleep reading it. "You're worried about me," he said, reaching out to stroke her feathers. She leaned into his touch, making that odd little chittering sound that always reminded him of someone trying to speak. "I'm fine, girl, really." But he wasn't fine, and they both knew it. The nightmares hadn't stopped since the end of second year. Images of Tom Riddle's face, of Ginny lying pale and still in the Chamber of Secrets, of the basilisk's massive form bearing down on him with fangs dripping venom. Harry shuddered and pulled his hand back from Hedwig's feathers, wrapping his arms around his knees instead. The Dursleys had been worse than usual this summer, if such a thing were possible. Uncle Vernon's rage over the incident with Aunt Marge still simmered just beneath the surface, manifesting in even tighter restrictions and longer periods locked in his room. Harry hadn't received so much as a slice of bread yesterday, and his stomach cramped with hunger as he contemplated another day of whatever meager scraps they might deign to slide through the cat flap they'd installed in his door. "At least I have you," he told Hedwig, attempting a smile, "and it's not like I was expecting birthday presents or anything. I mean, the Weasleys might send something, but the Dursleys would probably just confiscate it anyway." Hedwig made a sound that was almost like a scoff, if owls could scoff. She turned her head away from him, with what looked distinctly like disdain, her amber eyes flashing with an emotion Harry had never seen in an animal before. It was almost like indignation on his behalf, as if she personally resented the way he was being treated. Harry blinked hard, determined not to let the tears that had been threatening all morning finally fall. Crying wouldn't help anything. It never did. He'd learned that lesson thoroughly during his years with the Dursleys, and it had been reinforced by everything he'd faced at Hogwarts. Tears were a luxury he couldn't afford, not when there was always another crisis waiting around the corner. But 13 felt different somehow. 13 felt like standing on the edge of something vast and unknowable, looking down into a future that seemed determined to demand more of him than any teenager should have to give. He thought about the prophecy Professor Dumbledore had hinted at, about the weight of expectations that seemed to follow him wherever he went, about the way even his friends sometimes looked at him like he was supposed to have all the answers. "I don't know what I'm doing," he whispered to the empty room, the words tumbling out before he could stop them. "Everyone expects me to be this hero. But I'm just Harry. I'm just a kid who wants to go to school and worry about normal things like homework and Quidditch and whether Cho Chang might actually notice me exists. I don't want to fight dark wizards. I don't want to save anyone. I just want—" His voice broke completely then, and the tears he'd been fighting finally spilled over. He buried his face in his knees, shoulders shaking with the force of sobs he'd been holding back for weeks. All the fear and loneliness and desperate, aching need for someone to tell him it would be okay came pouring out in great, gasping waves. He didn't notice the change in the air pressure or the way the late morning light seemed to shimmer and bend around Hedwig's perch. He was too lost in his own misery to see the way her amber eyes began to glow with something that was definitely not natural, or the way her pristine white feathers seemed to ripple like water. What he did notice was the sudden warmth of a gentle hand settling on his shoulder. Harry's head snapped up so quickly he nearly gave himself whiplash, his vision still blurred with tears. For a moment, his mind simply couldn't process what he was seeing. Where Hedwig had been perched just seconds before, a woman now stood beside his bed, her hand resting lightly on his shoulder, with the kind of careful tenderness he'd only ever dreamed of receiving. She was beautiful, in an ethereal, almost otherworldly way. Her hair was the exact same pristine white as Hedwig's feathers, falling in soft waves to her shoulders, and her eyes were the same warm amber that Harry knew so well. She appeared to be in her early 20s, with high cheekbones and pale skin that seemed to glow with an inner light. She was wearing simple clothing, a cream-colored sweater and dark jeans, but there was something about the way she carried herself that suggested this was not someone ordinary. "Hello, Harry," she said softly, and her voice was like music, warm and melodious, with just a hint of the same protective concern he'd heard in Hedwig's hoots. "I'm so sorry. I never wanted to reveal myself this way, but I couldn't bear to watch you cry alone on your birthday." Harry scrambled backward until his shoulders hit the headboard, his heart hammering against his ribs. "You're not? Hedwig's not?" He couldn't seem to form a complete sentence, his mind reeling between panic and impossible hope. The woman, who couldn't possibly be his owl, except that she was standing exactly where Hedwig had been, and those eyes were unmistakably familiar, smiled sadly. "I know this is frightening. I know it doesn't make sense. But yes, Harry, I am Hedwig. Or rather, Hedwig is the form I've chosen to take for the past 3 years to stay close to you." "That's impossible," Harry whispered. But even as he said it, he knew with bone-deep certainty that it was true. Everything about her, the way she held her head, the protective tilt of her posture, the warmth in her gaze, was pure Hedwig. "I'm an animagus," she explained gently, settling carefully on the edge of his bed with the kind of deliberate slowness one might use with a spooked animal. "My name is Helena Whitmore, though your mother always called me Hel. I was her best friend at Hogwarts, and I made a promise to her the night you were born that I would always watch over you." Harry's world tilted sideways. His mother's best friend? But he'd never heard anyone mention a Helena Whitmore. "You knew my mum?" "I knew her better than anyone," Hel said, and there was such profound love and loss in her voice that Harry felt fresh tears prick at his eyes. "We were roommates from our 2nd year on. I was there for everything, Harry. Her first fight with your father, their first kiss, the night she discovered she was pregnant with you. I held her hand when she went into labor, and I was the last person she spoke to before Hagrid took you to your aunt and uncle. But no one ever mentioned you. Not Professor McGonagall, not Professor Dumbledore, not even Professor Snape." Hel's expression darkened slightly. "No, they wouldn't have. I made sure of that. After that night, after I found the ruins of your parents' house and realized what had happened, I swore an oath that I would protect you in whatever way I could. The most effective protection I could offer was to disappear completely from the wizarding world and become your owl." Harry stared at her, trying to reconcile everything he thought he knew about his life with this impossible revelation. You've been watching over me this whole time. Every moment, she said simply. Every letter you've sent, every danger you've faced at Hogwarts, every night you've cried yourself to sleep in this horrible house. I've been there. Do you remember the night in your first year when you were researching Nicholas Flamel in the library? You fell asleep at the table, and when you woke up, there was a book about alchemy open right beside you. Harry's eyes widened. That was you. That was me. Or the time last year when you were in the hospital wing after your encounter with the basilisk. I stayed perched by your window for 3 days straight, and I may have pecked Lockhart quite viciously when he tried to visit with that photographer. Despite everything, Harry felt his lips twitch toward a smile. You did do that. Madame Pumphrey said it was the most aggressive behavior she'd ever seen from an owl. Gilderoy Lockhart is an insufferable fraud who put you in danger with his incompetence, Hell said, with a sniff that was so perfectly Hedwig-like that Harry almost laughed. I was rather restrained, all things considered. The surreal normalcy of the conversation was helping Harry process what was happening. This was still Hedwig, just more. The protective instincts, the intelligence, the way she seemed to understand his moods better than anyone. It all made sense now. "Why are you telling me this now?" he asked. "Why reveal yourself on my birthday?" Hell's expression grew serious again. "Because you needed to know that you're not as alone as you think you are. And because—" She hesitated, as if weighing her words carefully. "Because you're 13 now, Harry. You're growing up, and there are things about your mother, about your family, about yourself, that you deserve to understand. Things that Dumbledore has chosen not to share with you." The way she said Dumbledore's name carried a weight of disappointment and frustration that Harry had never heard from an adult before. Everyone always spoke of the headmaster with reverence, as if he were infallible. "You don't like Professor Dumbledore," he said, and it wasn't really a question. "I think Dumbledore is a brilliant wizard who genuinely wants to protect you," Hell said carefully. "But I also think he sometimes prioritizes the greater good over individual happiness, and I think he's made decisions about your life that he had no right to make." Harry felt something shift inside his chest, a loosening of a tension he hadn't even realized he'd been carrying. For years, he'd had the nagging sense that there were things the adults in his life weren't telling him, important things that affected his own future. To hear someone finally acknowledge that felt like being given permission to trust his own instincts. "Tell me about her," he said suddenly. "About my mum. Not the stuff everyone always says about how brilliant and kind she was. Tell me what she was really like." Hell's entire face lit up with warmth and remembered joy. "Oh, Harry. Lily was magnificent, but she was also wonderfully, perfectly human. She was brilliant, yes, but she was also stubborn as a mule and had a temper that could strip paint. She once hexed a 7th-year Slytherin so badly for calling a first-year Muggle-born a mudblood that he was stuck to the ceiling of the Great Hall for an entire afternoon." Harry grinned despite himself. "Really? Really? And she was terrified of spiders, absolutely petrified. I once had to rescue her from the bathroom because she'd locked herself in rather than deal with a tiny spider in the corner. She stood on the toilet seat for 20 minutes, waiting for me to come remove it." Mum was afraid of spiders? This was definitely not part of the saintly portrait everyone always painted of his mother. Deathly afraid. She was also a terrible cook until she specifically set out to learn because she wanted to make your father's favorite biscuits. She burned so many batches that our dormitory smelled like smoke for weeks, and she cried during every single one of those awful romance novels she loved to read, even when she was rereading them for the 5th time and knew exactly what was going to happen. Harry felt like he was meeting his mother for the first time. This wasn't the perfect, distant figure of his imagination, but a real person with quirks and flaws and emotions. She sounds wonderful, he said softly. She was, Hel agreed. But more than that, she was real. She had bad days and good days. She worried about her exams and whether her hair looked right, and if she was making the right choices. She laughed at James's stupid jokes, even when she was trying to stay annoyed with him. She stayed up all night studying for defense against the dark arts, because she was determined to be the best, not because it came naturally to her. What did she think about me? I mean, before I was born. Hel's expression grew impossibly tender. She was so excited, Harry, and so scared. She used to talk to you constantly when you were still in her womb, telling you about everything she wanted to show you, all the places she wanted to take you. She had this whole list of things she wanted to teach you: how to fly, how to make her grandmother's chocolate cake, how to stand up for people who couldn't stand up for themselves. Harry felt his throat close up. She wanted to teach me to fly. She was a brilliant flyer, not as naturally gifted as James, but she worked twice as hard and ended up being almost as good. She said she couldn't wait to put you on a toy broomstick and watch you discover the joy of being airborne. I never knew she could fly. Everyone always talks about Dad being a great Quidditch player, but no one ever mentioned Mum. That's because she quit the team when she started dating your father. She said one Quidditch obsession in the relationship was quite enough. Thank you very much. Hel's eyes sparkled with mischief. Though between you and me, I think she just wanted him to have something that was entirely his own. Your mother was generous that way. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, Harry absorbing all these new details about the woman who'd died to save him. It was overwhelming and wonderful and heartbreaking all at once. Hel, he said finally. Yes? Why did you stay? I mean, you could have gone back to your regular life after you made sure I was safe with the Dursleys. Why spend 3 years as an owl? Hel looked down at her hands, and when she spoke, her voice was very soft. Because I loved your mother like a sister, and I love you like a son. Because I made a promise, and I keep my promises. And because... She looked up at him, and her amber eyes were bright with unshed tears. Because I couldn't bear the thought of you growing up completely alone, without anyone who really knew where you came from. Harry felt something crack open inside his chest, something that had been locked tight for as long as he could remember. Here was someone who had chosen to love him, not because he was the boy who lived, or because he was useful to the cause, or because they were obligated to care for him, but simply because he was Lily Potter's son. I'm so glad you stayed, he whispered, and meant it with every fibre of his being. Hel smiled, and it was like the sun coming out from behind clouds. So am I, dear one. So am I. Can you tell me more? About Mum and Dad? About what really happened? I'll tell you everything, she promised, and Harry believed her completely. But perhaps we should start with the most important thing first. What's that? Hel's smile grew wider, and for the first time in hours, Harry felt genuine happiness bubble up in his chest. Happy birthday, Harry James Potter. Your mother would be so incredibly proud of the young man you're becoming. And for the first time in 13 years, Harry Potter felt truly, completely loved on his birthday. Chapter 2. The Friend Who Stayed. Harry watched in fascination as Helena closed her eyes and took a deep, steadying breath. The air around her seemed to shimmer again, like heat waves rising from summer pavement. And then she was changing. It wasn't the violent transformation he'd expected from reading about animagi in his textbooks. Instead, it was fluid and graceful, like watching water flow uphill. Her human form seemed to fold in on itself, white hair becoming pristine feathers, amber eyes growing larger and more luminous, until Hedwig sat perched on the edge of his bed exactly where Helena had been moments before. Bloody hell, Harry whispered, then immediately flushed at his language. But Hedwig just fixed him with what he was beginning to recognize as an amused look and hooted softly, before transforming back into Helena with that same impossible grace. "Language, Harry James Potter," she said with mock severity, though her eyes were sparkling with mirth. "Your mother would have washed your mouth out with soap for that." "She would have?" Harry found himself grinning, despite the surreal nature of the situation. "Really?" "Oh, yes." Lily Evans had very strong opinions about proper language, especially from young men who were trying to impress her. Helena settled more comfortably on his bed, tucking her legs beneath her. Though I should mention that she also had quite the colourful vocabulary when she thought no one was listening. I once heard her call Severus Snape a sanctimonious, greasy-haired git, after he made a particularly nasty comment about muggle-borns in potions class. Harry's grin widened. "Mum said that about Professor Snape?" "Your mother had very little patience for bigotry in any form," Helena said, her voice growing more serious. "It's one of the things I admired most about her, actually. She never backed down from a fight when she thought someone was being treated unfairly, even if it meant putting herself in danger." The weight of what he was learning settled over Harry like a warm blanket. For 13 years, his mother had been a distant, perfect figure. The woman who died to save him, beloved by all who knew her. But Helena was painting a picture of someone real and complex and wonderfully human. "Tell me how you met her," he said, shifting to face Helena more fully. "Tell me everything." Helena's expression grew soft with memory. "It was during our second year at Hogwarts. I'd been struggling terribly in Transfiguration. Professor McGonagall was brilliant, but she had very little patience for students who couldn't grasp the theoretical foundations. I was sitting in the library one evening, nearly in tears over an essay about the principles of switching spells, when this red-haired girl I'd barely spoken to sat down across from me." Helena's voice took on a different quality as she spoke, as if she were seeing the memory play out before her. "She didn't say hello or introduce herself properly. She just looked at my essay, wrinkled her nose and said, 'That's complete rubbish, you know. You're thinking about it all wrong.' And then she spent the next 3 hours explaining transfiguration theory in a way that finally made sense to me." "That sounds like Mum," Harry said softly. "Always helping people." "But that wasn't why she did it," Helena continued. "When I asked her why she'd bothered helping someone she barely knew, she said it was because she'd heard me crying in the dormitory the night before and couldn't concentrate on her own homework knowing someone was struggling alone. She said it was selfish, really. Helping me was the only way she could get any studying done." Harry felt his chest tighten with emotion. "She helped you because she couldn't bear to hear you crying." "That was Lily," Helena said simply. She felt other people's pain as acutely as her own. Sometimes more so. It was her greatest strength and her most dangerous vulnerability. "What do you mean, dangerous?" Helena was quiet for a long moment, her amber eyes distant. "Your mother had a tendency to blame herself for things that weren't her fault. When someone she cared about was hurting, she assumed it was somehow her responsibility to fix it. It made her incredibly compassionate, but it also meant she carried burdens that weren't hers to carry." Harry thought about his own tendency to blame himself for everything that went wrong at Hogwarts, for every person who got hurt because of their connection to him. "I think I understand." "I'm sure you do," Helena said gently. "You're very much like her in that way." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the late morning sun streaming through Harry's grimy window and casting dancing shadows on the walls. Harry found himself studying Helena's face, looking for traces of the owl he'd known for 3 years. The way she held her head, the alertness in her posture, the protective way she positioned herself between him and the door. It was all unmistakably Hedwig. "How long did it take?" he asked suddenly. To become such close friends, I mean. Not long at all, actually. Within a few weeks, we were practically inseparable. I'd never had a friend like Lily before. Someone who understood me completely, who I could tell anything to without fear of judgment. My family? Helena's expression darkened slightly. Well, let's just say the Whitmores weren't known for their warmth or acceptance. Lily was the first person who ever made me feel like I was enough, exactly as I was. What was your family like? Harry asked, though he had a sinking feeling he already knew the answer. Pure-blood supremacists of the highest order, Helena said with a bitter laugh. The sort who believed that magical blood was sacred and that anything less than perfect genealogy was an affront to wizarding kind. When they discovered I'd befriended a muggle-born, they sent me a howler that arrived during breakfast and screamed at me for 5 solid minutes about the shame I was bringing to the family name. Harry winced sympathetically. He'd received a howler from Mrs. Weasley the previous year, and it had been mortifying, even though everyone knew she was scolding him out of love and concern. What did you do? I wrote them back and told them that if their definition of shame included kindness and loyalty to friends, then I was happy to be shameful. They disowned me by return post. Helena shrugged, though Harry could see the old hurt still lingering in her eyes. It was devastating at the time, but looking back, it was probably the best thing that could have happened to me. It freed me to become the person I actually wanted to be, instead of the person they expected me to be. And Mum helped you through it? Lily held me while I cried for 3 days straight, Helena said softly. She smuggled chocolate from the kitchen, helped me with my homework when I was too upset to concentrate, and reminded me every day that family isn't just about blood. It's about the people who choose to love you. Harry felt a familiar ache in his chest. I wish I could have known her. You would have loved her, Helena said with absolute certainty. And she would have been so proud of you, Harry. The way you've faced everything that's been thrown at you, the way you protect your friends, the way you refuse to let cruelty make you cruel. That's all, Lily. Tell me more about her and Dad, Harry said, eager to learn everything he could. How did they really get together? Everyone always says Dad was head over heels and Mum couldn't stand him at first. Helena laughed, and the sound was warm and genuinely amused. That's not entirely inaccurate, though it's a rather simplified version of events. James Potter was many things: brilliant, brave, loyal to a fault. But he was also an arrogant show-off with the emotional intelligence of a flobberworm for most of his Hogwarts career. He was really that bad? Oh, he was dreadful, Helena confirmed cheerfully. Constantly hexing people in the corridors, showing off on his broomstick, making grand romantic gestures that were more about getting attention than actually expressing genuine feeling. Lily found him insufferable, and she wasn't shy about telling him so. But she changed her mind eventually. It took yours, Helena said, and it wasn't a sudden change either. It was more like watching ice slowly melt. James would do something genuinely kind, defending a younger student from bullies, helping someone with their homework without expecting anything in return, and Lily would notice. She'd file it away as evidence that maybe there was more to him than just the arrogant exterior. Helena paused, her expression growing thoughtful. The turning point came during our 6th year, when Severus called Lily that awful name in front of half the school. James hexed him for it, but when Lily turned her anger on James instead of thanking him, he didn't argue or try to justify himself. He just accepted her anger and walked away. That night, she came back to our dormitory in tears. Because she was upset about what Snape said? Partly, but mostly because she realized she'd been unfair to James. He'd defended her honor when her oldest friend had just betrayed her trust, and instead of thanking him, she'd attacked him for it. She spent the rest of the night wondering when James Potter had become the kind of person who who would do the right thing, even when he knew he wouldn't get credit for it. Harry tried to imagine his parents as teenagers, navigating the complex social dynamics of Hogwarts while falling in love. It was both wonderful and slightly surreal. When did she first tell you she liked him? She never actually said it outright, Helena admitted with a smile. But I knew something had changed when she stopped complaining about him quite so vehemently. And then I caught her watching him during Quidditch practice one afternoon, and the look on her face. Well, let's just say, it wasn't the look of someone who found him completely insufferable anymore. What did you do? I teased her mercilessly, of course, Helena said with a grin. That's what best friends are for. Though I also made sure to mention all the genuinely good things I'd noticed about James over the years. His loyalty to his friends, his natural leadership abilities, the way he'd grown out of his worst habits. Lily was too stubborn to admit she was interested without some encouragement. And they got together in 7th year. Just before Christmas holidays, James had been asking her out regularly for months, but he'd changed his approach completely. No more grand gestures or public declarations, just quiet, genuine requests to spend time together. Would you like to study together in the library? Want to walk down to Hogsmeade with me? That sort of thing. And finally, Lily said yes. Helena's voice grew warm with remembered happiness. I'll never forget the morning after their first real date. Lily came back to our dormitory, practically glowing, and spent an hour telling me about their conversation over Butterbeer. She said it was like discovering that someone she'd written off completely was actually exactly the kind of person she'd been hoping to find. They were happy together. Deliriously happy, Helena confirmed. Once Lily finally admitted to herself that she cared about James, she fell completely and utterly in love with him. And James, well, James had been in love with her for years, but having his feelings returned transformed him completely. He became the best version of himself, still confident and brave, but also gentle and considerate in ways I'd never seen from him before. Harry felt a warm glow of happiness spreading through his chest. It was wonderful to hear that his parents had been truly, deeply happy together, even if it had been for such a short time. Were you there when I was born? He asked softly. Helena's entire expression transformed, becoming soft and luminous with joy. I was the first person besides your parents to hold you, she said, her voice thick with emotion. Lily went into labor on a Tuesday evening in late July. It was during the height of the war, and everyone was terrified that you-know-who might try to attack while she was vulnerable. So they'd arranged for her to give birth in a safe house with only a trusted healer and a few close friends present. What was I like? You were perfect, Helena said simply. Tiny and red-faced and absolutely perfect. You had the most incredible head of dark hair that stuck up in every direction, and when you opened your eyes, they were the exact same green as your mother's. James took one look at you and started crying. I'd never seen him cry before. Not when he broke his arm falling off his broom. Not when his own father died. But the moment he saw you, he just fell apart. Harry felt his own eyes prick with tears. Really? Really? And Lily. Oh, Harry, your mother was radiant. She was exhausted and sweaty and had just been through hours of labor. But the moment the healer put you in her arms, she looked like she was lit from within. She kept touching your little fingers and counting your toes and whispering about all the things she wanted to show you. What kinds of things? Everything, Helena said with a watery laugh. She wanted to take you to see the ocean, to teach you to read, to show you how to make her grandmother's treacle tart. She wanted to introduce you to all her favorite books and take you flying and watch you discover magic for the first time. She had so many plans. Helena's voice trailed off, and Harry could see the old grief still sharp in her amber eyes. What happened that night? He asked quietly. the night they died?" Helena was silent for a long moment, and when she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I wasn't supposed to be there. James and Lily had been under the Fidelius charm for months, hidden away in Godric's Hollow while the war raged around them. But you'd been fussy that week, not sleeping well, crying more than usual, and Lily was exhausted. She asked me to come stay for a few days to help with the night feedings." Harry leaned forward, hanging on every word. "I'd been there for 3 days when it happened. You'd finally fallen asleep around 9 o'clock, and we were all sitting in the living room, just enjoying a quiet evening together. James was reading a Quidditch magazine, Lily was knitting you a new jumper, and I was working on some correspondence for the Order. And then, Helena's hands were shaking now, and Harry reached out instinctively to cover them with his own. The front door exploded, she continued, her voice hollow with remembered terror. Just gone, completely destroyed. And there he was, standing in the doorway like something out of a nightmare. You know who. Tall and pale and terrible, with those horrible red eyes that seemed to look right through you. Harry felt his blood run cold. "What did you do?" "James shouted for us to run, to take you upstairs while he held him off. I grabbed you from your crib while Lily got her wand, and we ran for the stairs. I could hear James fighting behind us, spells flying, furniture crashing. And then—" Helena's voice broke completely. "And then there was the flash of green light, and everything went quiet." Harry's throat felt tight. "Dad, your father died protecting us," Helena said firmly. "He held you-know-who off long enough for us to get upstairs, and he never stopped fighting. Not for a second. And then what happened? Lily barricaded us in the nursery and started casting every protective charm she could think of. But we both knew it wouldn't be enough. When we heard footsteps on the stairs, she turned to me and made me promise something." "What?" Helena looked directly into Harry's eyes, her amber gaze intense and unwavering. "She made me promise that no matter what happened to her, I would make sure you were safe. That I would watch over you and protect you and love you like she couldn't anymore. And she made me swear that I would never let you grow up believing you were alone in the world." Harry felt tears streaming down his cheeks, but he didn't try to wipe them away. "I promised," Helena continued, her own voice thick with tears. "And then she kissed your forehead and told you how much she loved you, and the door burst open. You saw it happen?" Helena nodded, pain etched in every line of her face. "I saw her step between you-know-who and your crib. I heard her beg him to spare you, to take her instead. And when he cast that terrible curse—" She couldn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. Harry understood. "How did you escape?" "I didn't at first. When your mother's protection destroyed you-know-who's physical form, the magical backlash brought the whole upper floor of the house down. I was trapped under the rubble for hours, badly injured and barely conscious. By the time I managed to dig myself out, Hagrid had already found you and taken you away. You tried to find me." "I spent weeks searching," Helena said. "But Dumbledore had hidden you too well. Eventually, I realized that the only way I would ever be able to find you was to become someone innocuous, someone who could get close to you without arousing suspicion. So you became an owl. I registered as an animagus in secret and practiced the transformation until I could maintain it indefinitely. And then I waited. I knew that eventually someone would take you to Diagon Alley to buy school supplies, and I made sure to be there when they did." Harry's mind reeled. "You've been planning this since I was a baby." "I've been loving you since before you could walk," Helena corrected gently. "Everything else was just logistics." The magnitude of her sacrifice hit Harry like a physical blow. She'd given up her human life, her freedom, her entire identity to keep a promise to his mother. She'd spent 3 years living as an owl, watching him struggle and suffer, unable to offer him the comfort and support she desperately wanted to give. "Why didn't you reveal yourself sooner?" he asked, his voice cracking. "When the Dursleys were horrible to me, or when I was facing Voldemort at school, why stay hidden?" Helena's expression grew pained. "Because I knew that the moment I revealed myself, everything would change. Dumbledore would have questions I couldn't answer without exposing the fact that I'd been deliberately deceiving him for years. The Ministry would want to investigate my background and my connection to your family. And you," she reached out to cup his face gently, "you would have become a target in ways you weren't prepared to handle." "What do you mean?" "You know who isn't truly gone, Harry. His spirit lingers, and his followers are still out there, waiting for him to return. If they'd learned that Lily Potter's best friend was alive and protecting her son, they would have come after both of us without hesitation. As long as I remained just your owl, you were safer." Harry understood, but it didn't make the years of loneliness hurt any less. "I needed you," he whispered. "I needed someone who loved me." "I know," Helena said, and her voice was full of regret and love in equal measure. "I know, and I'm so sorry. I watched you cry yourself to sleep countless nights, and it nearly killed me not to be able to comfort you properly. But I couldn't risk your safety, not even for my own need to take care of you. So why now? Why reveal yourself today?" Helena smiled sadly. "Because you're growing up, and the threats you're facing are getting more serious. Because you deserve to know the truth about your family and your history. And because—" she hesitated, then continued more quietly. "Because I realized that protecting you from emotional pain wasn't worth sacrificing the connection you need to grow into the strong, confident young man your mother always believed you could become." Harry stared at her, processing everything she'd told him. His entire understanding of his life had been turned upside down in the space of a single morning, but instead of feeling overwhelmed, he felt lighter. Like a burden he hadn't realized he was carrying had suddenly been lifted from his shoulders. "You said you'd tell me everything," he said finally. "About Mum, about Dad, about what Dumbledore hasn't told me." Helena nodded seriously. "I will. We have the rest of the summer, and there's so much you need to know. About your parents' work with the Order, about the prophecy that marked you, about the real reason Dumbledore placed you with the Dursleys despite having other options." "Other options?" "Your parents had named guardians in their will, Harry. People who loved them and would have loved you. Dumbledore ignored those wishes, and placed you with your aunt and uncle instead, and I think you deserve to know why." Harry felt a familiar anger stirring in his chest, but it was tempered by the overwhelming relief of finally having someone who would tell him the truth. "Will you stay?" he asked, suddenly afraid that this was all too good to be true, that Helena would disappear as quickly as she'd appeared. "Will you stay human, I mean?" Helena smiled, and it was warm and reassuring and full of love. "I'll stay human when we're alone together. But I'll still need to be Hedwig sometimes, especially when other people are around. It's still not entirely safe for them to know who I really am." "But you'll be here? Really here?" "I'll be here," she promised, and Harry believed her with every fiber of his being. "I kept my promise to your mother for 13 years, and I'm going to keep it for as long as you need me." For the first time in his life, Harry Potter fell asleep that night, knowing that someone who truly loved him was watching over him, and that he was no longer alone in the world. Chapter 3. Secrets of Lily Evans. The afternoon sun had shifted, casting longer shadows across Harry's small bedroom, as Helena settled herself more comfortably against his headboard. They'd been talking for hours now, but Harry felt like he could listen forever. Every story, every memory she shared was another piece of his mother that he'd never known existed. Another glimpse of the real woman behind the legend. "Tell me something embarrassing about her," Harry said suddenly, grinning at Helena's surprised expression. "Everyone always talks about how perfect she was, But you said she was human. So tell me something that proves it." Helena laughed, a warm, delighted sound that reminded Harry so much of Hedwig's pleased hooting that it made his heart ache. "Oh, you want embarrassing. I have stories that would make your mother rise from the grave just to hex me for telling them." "Please," Harry said eagerly. "I want to know everything. The good, the bad, the mortifying, all of it." "Well," Helena said, her amber eyes sparkling with mischief, "there was the time in 4th year when Lily was so determined to impress Professor Slughorn that she practiced her Felix Felicis brewing technique until 3 in the morning. She was convinced she'd perfected it, so she decided to test a tiny amount before class the next day. Did it work? Oh, it worked magnificently. Unfortunately, what she'd actually brewed was a variant that made her incredibly lucky with magic, but absolutely catastrophic with everything else. She aced every spell in Charms and Transfiguration that day, but she also managed to trip down 3 different staircases, spill pumpkin juice all over Severus Snape's homework, and somehow get her head stuck in a suit of armor on the 4th floor. Harry burst out laughing. "No way. Really?" "Cross my heart," Helena said solemnly. "It took McGonagall, Flitwick, and Hagrid working together to extract her from that armor, and she had dents in her forehead for a week. She was so mortified that she hid in our dormitory for 2 days straight, refusing to come out until the bruises faded." "That's brilliant," Harry said, wiping tears of laughter from his eyes. "What else?" "Oh, let's see. There was the time she tried to cut her own hair because she was furious with James and wanted to do something dramatic. Only she'd never cut hair before, in her life. She ended up with one side down to her shoulders and the other barely reaching her ears. I found her sobbing in the bathroom at 2 in the morning, trying to even it out with nail scissors." "What did you do?" "I marched her down to Madame Pomfrey, who took one look at the disaster and spent 3 hours fixing it with a combination of magical remedies and very precise charm work. Lily ended up with the most beautiful pixie cut you've ever seen, but she was so embarrassed about the whole thing that she told everyone she'd done it on purpose as a statement about female independence." Harry could picture it perfectly. His mother, usually so composed and intelligent, reduced to tears over a self-inflicted hair catastrophe. It made her seem wonderfully, reassuringly human. "She sounds like she had a temper," he observed. Helena's expression grew more thoughtful. "She did, actually. A fierce one, though she usually tried to keep it under control. Lily felt things very deeply, and when she was hurt or angry, it consumed her completely. She'd go quiet and distant for days, working through whatever was bothering her before she felt safe to discuss it rationally. Is that what happened with Snape, when their friendship ended?" The lightness faded from Helena's face, replaced by something more complex, sadness mixed with old anger and a trace of protective fury. "The situation with Severus was—" She paused, clearly choosing her words carefully. "More complicated than most people understand, and more heartbreaking." "Tell me," Harry said softly. "Please. I know what everyone says happened, that he called her a mudblood and she never forgave him. But you were there. You knew both of them." Helena was quiet for a long moment, her amber eyes distant with memory. When she spoke, her voice was heavy with old grief. "Severus Snape was Lily's first friend in the wizarding world," she said finally. "Her very first. They met when she was 9 years old, and he was the one who explained magic to her, who told her she wasn't a freak or dangerous. For years he was her anchor to this world that she desperately wanted to belong to, but didn't fully understand. But something changed. Everything changed when they got to Hogwarts. Suddenly, Severus was sorted into a house where blood purity mattered above all else, where he was surrounded by people who saw Lily as fundamentally inferior simply because of her parentage. And Lily. Lily was sorted into Gryffindor, where she was beloved and accepted and celebrated for exactly who she was. Helena's voice grew more strained. I think Severus felt like he was losing her from the moment the Sorting Hat placed them in different houses. And instead of fighting for their friendship, he started pulling away. He began spending time with students who openly despised Muggle-borns, started learning curses that were designed to hurt people like her. Lily tried to hold on to their friendship for years, but it was like watching someone she loved slowly disappear into someone she didn't recognize. And the Mudblood incident was the final straw? It was the culmination of years of small betrayals, Helena said sadly. By 5th year, Severus was already deeply involved with the group that would become Death Eaters. He was learning dark magic, participating in attacks on Muggle-born students, and Lily was watching her oldest friend transform into someone who stood for everything she despised. Helena shifted on the bed, pulling her knees up to her chest in a gesture that reminded Harry painfully of how Hedwig would huddle when she was agitated. The day it happened, the day he called her that name, Lily had spent the entire morning defending him to other students who were calling him a future Death Eater. She was still fighting for their friendship, even when he'd already abandoned it. And then James humiliated him in front of half the school, and instead of being grateful for her intervention, Severus lashed out at the one person who was still trying to save him. Mum was defending him? Right up until that moment, Helena confirmed. She told James to leave Severus alone. She tried to help him when he was hanging upside down, and his response was to call her the most degrading name he could think of, in front of everyone. After years of watching him choose darkness over their friendship, that was the moment Lily finally accepted that the boy she'd loved as a brother was gone. Harry felt his throat tighten. What did she do? She cried, Helena said simply, for days. She'd been grieving the loss of their friendship for years, but that moment made it real and final, in a way she couldn't ignore anymore. She felt like she'd failed him somehow, like there was something more she could have done to save him from the path he'd chosen. But it wasn't her fault. Of course it wasn't. But Lily had this tendency to blame herself for other people's choices, especially when those people were important to her. She carried guilt about Severus for the rest of her life, wondering if she could have been a better friend, if she could have found a way to pull him back from the darkness. Harry thought about Professor Snape's obvious hatred for him, the way the man seemed to take personal pleasure in making Harry's life difficult. It was hard to reconcile that with the image of someone his mother had once loved as a brother. Did she ever regret ending their friendship? She regretted how it ended, Helena said carefully. But no, I don't think she regretted the choice itself. By that point, continuing to associate with Severus would have meant compromising her own values and safety. She couldn't save someone who didn't want to be saved. They sat in contemplative silence for a moment, both lost in thoughts of friendship and betrayal and the painful complexity of human relationships. You said Mum blamed herself for things that weren't her fault, Harry said eventually. What else did she feel guilty about? Helena's expression grew even more pained. Oh, Harry, your mother carried so much unnecessary guilt. She felt responsible for every Muggle-born student who was attacked by Death Eaters, every friend who was hurt in the war, every choice your father made that put him in danger. She blamed herself for not being able to protect everyone she loved. That sounds familiar, Harry muttered, thinking of all the times he'd felt responsible for his friends getting hurt. You're very much like her in that way, Helena agreed gently. But there was something else, something she never told anyone except me. She felt guilty about being magical. What do you mean? Your mother's relationship with magic was complicated, Harry. On one hand, she loved it desperately. The beauty of it, the power of it, the way it made her feel like she could do anything. But on the other hand, she was acutely aware that her magic came at a cost to other people she loved. Helena's voice grew softer, more careful. Your Aunt Petunia, for instance. They'd been inseparable as children, but magic drove a wedge between them that Lily never managed to remove. Every letter from home was a reminder that her sister resented her for having something Petunia could never have. Aunt Petunia was jealous of Mum's magic? Desperately jealous. And Lily knew it. She tried everything she could think of to bridge that gap. Writing letters, sending gifts, even asking Professor Dumbledore if there was any way to share magical ability with a Muggle. She would have given up her magic entirely if it meant she could have her sister back. Harry stared at Helena in shock. The idea of his mother voluntarily giving up magic, the thing that defined the wizarding world, the thing that made her special and powerful, was almost incomprehensible. She really would have done that. In a heartbeat, Helena said firmly. Family was everything to Lily. The fact that her magic had cost her her relationship with Petunia was a source of constant pain for her. Even after Petunia stopped responding to her letters, even after the horrible things your aunt said at their parents' funeral, Lily never stopped hoping they could find their way back to each other. What did Aunt Petunia say at the funeral? Helena's jaw tightened with old anger. Things that were cruel and unforgivable, born out of grief and jealousy and years of resentment. She blamed Lily for their parents' deaths, said that if she hadn't been a freak, their parents wouldn't have been so worried about the Wizarding World's war, wouldn't have died in a car accident while driving to London to discuss Lily's safety with some ministry officials. Harry felt his stomach drop. That's not true, though, is it? Of course not, Helena said firmly. Your grandparents died in a terrible accident that had nothing to do with magic. But Petunia was grieving and looking for someone to blame, and Lily was an easy target. Your mother spent months after the funeral wondering if Petunia was right, if her magic had somehow caused their deaths. But you helped her through it? I tried. We all did. James, your other friends from school. But Lily's guilt was like a living thing, always finding new ways to hurt her. She was convinced that loving her was dangerous for everyone around her. Helena's expression grew distant, lost in painful memories. That's actually part of why it took her so long to accept James's feelings. She was terrified that being with her would put him in danger, that you-know-who would target him specifically because of her. She tried to push him away for months, convinced she was protecting him. What changed her mind? James did, Helena said with a small smile. He told her that if she thought he was the kind of person who would abandon someone he loved because of danger, then she didn't know him as well as he'd hoped. He said he'd rather live one day, truly happy with her, than 100 years safe and alone without her. Harry felt his chest warm with pride. His father might have been an arrogant teenager for much of his Hogwarts career, but when it mattered, he'd known exactly what to say. They were really happy together, weren't they? Blissfully happy, Helena confirmed. Once Lily finally let herself love James completely, she threw herself into it with the same intensity she brought to everything else. She studied his favorite Quidditch plays so she could discuss them intelligently, learned to cook his mother's recipes, even started reading strategy books to help the Order with their planning. Mum was involved with the Order? More than involved, Helena said, her voice filling with pride. Lily was one of Dumbledore's most trusted agents. She had a brilliant tactical mind and an intuitive understanding of protective magic that made her invaluable to the war effort. Some of the charms and wards that protected Order safe houses were her innovations. Harry felt another piece of his understanding click into place. Is that why you said she was researching protective magic? It started as research for the Order, but it became something more personal as the war escalated. Lily had a theory that the most powerful protective magic came from love and sacrifice, that a mother's love for her child could create barriers that even the darkest magic couldn't penetrate. Helena's voice grew thick with emotion. She spent months developing new applications of protective charms, new ways to bind magical protections to bloodlines and family bonds. She was convinced that if anything happened to her and James, she could find a way to ensure you were still protected. The protection that saved me from Voldemort, that was Mum's research? That was your mother's greatest achievement, Helena said softly. The night she died, she didn't just sacrifice herself to save you. She activated protections she'd been weaving for months, magical safeguards that turned her love into an actual shield. You-know-who's curse rebounded, not just because she died for you, but because she'd spent months preparing for that exact scenario. Harry felt tears prick at his eyes. All these years he'd thought his mother's sacrifice had been spontaneous, a desperate mother's final act of love. But she'd been planning for it, preparing for it, researching ways to save him, even if she couldn't save herself. She knew it might happen. She knew you-know-who would come for you eventually, Helena said gently. The prophecy made that inevitable. But she was determined that when he did, he would find you protected in ways he couldn't possibly anticipate or overcome. What prophecy? Harry asked, though he had a sinking feeling he already knew the answer. Helena looked surprised. Dumbledore hasn't told you about the prophecy. He's mentioned it, but he's never told me what it actually says. Helena's expression darkened with familiar frustration. Of course he hasn't. Dumbledore has this maddening habit of deciding what information people can handle, regardless of whether it's their right to know. Do you know what it says? I know parts of it, Helena admitted. Lily told me what she'd learned from Dumbledore, though I suspect he didn't share the full text with her either. Something about a child born at the end of July, with the power to defeat you-know-who, marked as his equal, with neither able to live while the other survives. Harry felt his stomach clench. Neither can live while the other survives. Helena reached out to grasp his hand, her amber eyes fierce with protective intensity. Don't let it frighten you, Harry. Prophecies are tricky things. They can be interpreted in dozens of ways, and they often fulfill themselves in an unexpected manner. Your mother certainly didn't see that line as a death sentence. What did she think it meant? She thought it meant you'd have choices to make someday, difficult ones that would determine both your fate and his. But she also believed that her protections would ensure you lived long enough to make those choices as a grown man, not as a child forced to fight battles he wasn't ready for. Helena's grip on his hand tightened. She wanted you to have a childhood, Harry. A real one, with people who loved you, and time to grow into your own person before the weight of prophecy fell on your shoulders. She made specific arrangements for your care, people she trusted to give you the life she wanted you to have. The Guardians Dad mentioned? The ones Dumbledore ignored? Sirius Black was your godfather, officially named in their will as your primary guardian, but they also designated backup guardians in case something happened to him. Remus Lupin, the Longbottoms, even the Weasleys, though they barely knew Arthur and Molly at the time. Your parents wanted to ensure you'd be raised by people who understood the wizarding world and could prepare you properly for what might come. Harry felt a familiar surge of anger at Professor Dumbledore, but instead he sent me to the Dursleys. Against your parents' express wishes, Helena confirmed, her voice tight with old fury. Lily specifically requested in her will that you never be placed with Petunia. She knew her sister's feelings about magic, knew that you'd be raised to feel ashamed of who you were. She wanted you raised by people who would celebrate your heritage, not suppress it. Did Mum know? About how bad the Dursleys could be? Helena's expression grew pained. She suspected. Petunia's letters had grown increasingly bitter over the years, full of resentment and barely concealed hatred for everything magical. Lily knew that her sister saw her as a freak and a burden, and she couldn't imagine Petunia treating her child with any kindness. So she made other plans. She made extensive plans, lists of guardians, financial arrangements, even specific instructions about your education and upbringing. She wrote letters to be given to you at different ages, explaining your heritage and your parents' love in ways she hoped you'd be able to understand as you grew. Harry's heart clenched. Letters! What happened to them? Helena's expression grew even darker. I assume Dumbledore has them, along with your parents' will, their research notes, and probably other things they meant for you to have, all stored away somewhere for your own good, no doubt. Why would he keep them from me? Because Dumbledore believes in the greater good above individual happiness, Helena said, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. He probably convinced himself that keeping you ignorant and isolated would somehow make you stronger or more determined when the time came to face you-know-who. That's horrible. It's misguided, Helena corrected, though her tone suggested she agreed with Harry's assessment. I think Dumbledore genuinely cares about you, Harry, but he also sees you as a weapon in a war, and he's more concerned with ensuring you're an effective weapon than ensuring you're a happy, well-adjusted young man. Harry thought about the headmaster's twinkling eyes and grandfatherly demeanour, trying to reconcile that image with someone who would deliberately keep him from his family's love and legacy. Mum really wrote me letters? Dozens of them, Helena said softly. One for your first birthday, one for when you started school, one for when you began showing magical ability. She even wrote one for your wedding day, full of advice about love and marriage, and the importance of choosing a partner who makes you laugh. Harry felt fresh tears spill down his cheeks. The thought that his mother had tried to parent him from beyond the grave, had attempted to be there for every milestone she knew she might miss, was both beautiful and heartbreaking. I want them, he said fiercely. I want everything she left for me. You should have them, Helena agreed. And someday, when you're older and stronger, you'll need to decide whether you're going to keep accepting Dumbledore's version of what's best for you, or whether you're going to demand the truth and the choices that are rightfully yours. What would Mum have wanted me to do? Helena smiled, and for a moment she looked exactly like Hedwig, delivering a particularly satisfying piece of news. Your mother believed that knowledge was power, and that people had the right to make informed decisions about their own lives. She would have wanted you to ask questions, to demand answers, and to never let anyone, no matter how well-intentioned, make important choices for you without your input. Even if those choices were dangerous? Especially then, Helena said firmly. Lily Potter was many things, but she was never a coward. She would have taught you to face danger with courage and preparation, not to avoid it through ignorance. Harry felt something shift inside him, a growing sense of determination and purpose that had nothing to do with prophecies or expectations from others. This was about claiming his own life, his own choices, his own understanding of who he was and where he came from. Will you help me? He asked. To find those letters, to learn everything she wanted me to know. Helena's amber eyes blazed with fierce loyalty. I've been waiting 13 years for you to ask me that question, she said. Of course I'll help you. We'll uncover every truth they've tried to hide from you. We'll claim every piece of your heritage they've denied you, and we'll make sure you have all the tools you need to choose your own path forward. What if Dumbledore tries to stop us? Then Dumbledore will discover that Lily Potter's best friend can be just as stubborn and protective as she was, Helena said, with a smile that was all teeth. He's had 13 years to shape you according to his plans, Harry. I think it's time you learned what your mother's plans looked like instead. For the first time in his life, Harry Potter felt like he had an ally who was entirely on his side, someone who cared more about his happiness and agency than about his usefulness to a cause. It was a feeling he intended to hold on to, no matter what came next. Chapter 4. The Promise. Made the evening shadows had begun to creep across the walls of Harry's bedroom, painting everything in shades of amber and gold that reminded him eerily of Helena's eyes, They'd been talking for most of the day now, pausing only when the Dursleys made noise downstairs, or when Helena needed to transform back into Hedwig to avoid suspicion. Each revelation had shaken Harry's understanding of his life more thoroughly. But this felt different somehow. More final. As if they were approaching the heart of something that would change everything. Helena sat cross-legged on his bed now, her white hair catching the dying light from his window. She'd been quiet for several minutes, her expression distant and thoughtful, as if she were trying to decide how much to tell him. "There's something else," she said finally, her voice softer than it had been all day. "Something I haven't told you yet about the promise I made to your mother. It wasn't just a simple vow between friends, Harry. It was a magical oath, bound in blood and witnessed by magic itself." Harry felt his stomach tighten. "What does that mean?" "It means that when I swore to protect you until you no longer needed protection, I bound my very essence to that promise. My magic, my life force, my ability to exist in this world, all of it became tied to your safety and well-being." Helena held up her hand, and Harry gasped. Faint silver lines traced across her palm like delicate scars, forming an intricate pattern that seemed to pulse with its own inner light. "The oath mark," she explained, watching his awed expression. "It appeared the moment I spoke the words, and it's never faded. Every day for the past 13 years, it's reminded me of my commitment to you." "But why?" Harry asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Why bind yourself so completely? You could have just watched over me without all that." Helena's smile was sad and beautiful, and full of a love so profound it made Harry's chest ache. "Because your mother asked me to swear it, and because I knew that anything less wouldn't be enough. The world you were going to grow up in was dangerous, Harry. Voldemort's followers were still out there. Dumbledore was making decisions I didn't trust, and you were going to need protection that went beyond what any ordinary guardian could provide." She flexed her fingers, and the silver lines seemed to brighten. "A blood oath doesn't just bind you to act, it binds you to succeed. If I had failed to protect you, if I had allowed harm to come to you through my negligence or weakness, the magic would have destroyed me." Harry stared at her in horror. "You could have died?" "I could have ceased to exist entirely," Helena corrected gently. "Not just died, been unmade, wiped from existence as if I'd never been born. That's the price of a blood oath, and the power of it." "That's insane," Harry said, his voice rising with panic. "You risked everything, your entire existence, for me." "I risked everything for love," Helena said firmly, "for the promise I made to the most important person in my life, and for the child she died protecting. There was never any question, Harry. Never any hesitation." Harry felt tears sting his eyes. The magnitude of her sacrifice was overwhelming. Not just the years spent in animal form, but the constant risk of complete annihilation if she failed him in any way. "How do you live with that?" he whispered. "How do you function, knowing that any mistake could destroy you?" Helena's expression grew thoughtful. "Do you know what the most dangerous part of staying in animal form for extended periods is?" Harry shook his head, not trusting his voice. "It's not the physical discomfort, though that can be significant. It's not even the isolation from human society, though that's harder than you might imagine. It's the gradual loss of human thought patterns, human emotional complexity, human memory." Helena stood up and walked to his window, gazing out at the neat suburban street below. "Animals think differently than humans, Harry. Their concerns are immediate, practical, instinctive. Food, shelter, safety, territory. When you spend too long in animal form, those patterns begin to override your human consciousness. You start to forget why you chose the transformation in the first place. But you didn't forget. No, but it was a constant battle. Every day, I had to deliberately remember why I was there. I had to force myself to think like Helena, Not like Hedwig. I developed rituals, mental exercises, ways of anchoring my human identity, even while living as an owl. She turned back to face him, and Harry could see the strain in her amber eyes, the exhaustion of years spent fighting against her own nature. I would recite your mother's favorite poems every morning when I woke up. I would mentally replay conversations we'd had at Hogwarts, remember the sound of her laugh, the way she wrinkled her nose when she was concentrating. I kept a running mental list of all the things I wanted to tell you someday, all the stories about your parents that I needed to preserve. That must have been exhausting. It was, Helena admitted. There were days when it would have been so much easier to just let go, to become Hedwig completely and forget about Helena Whitmore entirely. The owl's life was simpler, more peaceful. No guilt, no grief, no crushing sense of responsibility. Harry felt his chest clench with sudden fear. But you didn't? No, because every time I was tempted, something would happen that reminded me why I was there. You'd have a nightmare, and I'd want to comfort you. You'd receive a letter from your friends, and I'd see how it made you light up with happiness. You'd face some new danger at school, and I'd remember that you needed someone watching over you who understood the full scope of what you were dealing with. Helena moved back to the bed and sat down beside him, close enough that he could feel the warmth radiating from her skin. The blood oath helped too. The magic itself would pull me back whenever I drifted too far toward full animal consciousness. It was like having a constant reminder that Helena Whitmore had responsibilities that Hedwig couldn't fulfill. "What kinds of things did you do?" Harry asked, fascinated despite his concern. "To protect me, I mean. Besides delivering letters and being you." Helena smiled, and for the first time all day, it was a genuinely happy expression. "Oh, Harry, you have no idea how busy I've been these past 3 years. Tell me. Well, let's start with Hogwarts itself. Do you remember your first night there, when you couldn't sleep and decided to explore the castle?" Harry nodded. "I got lost trying to find the bathroom and ended up in some corridor full of talking portraits. You also almost walked straight into a patch of devil's snare that had been poorly contained by the herbology professor," Helena said dryly. "I had to fly ahead and screech loud enough to wake half the castle to get you to change direction. The noise that scared me away from that corridor? That was me. And do you remember the troll incident in your first year, when you and your friends went after Hermione? Of course. You 3 weren't the only ones in those bathrooms that night. I was there too, using every bit of owl anatomy I possessed to distract and disorient that troll while you figured out how to stop it. Do you think it was coincidence that it kept turning its back on you at exactly the right moments?" Harry stared at her in amazement. "You were fighting the troll." "I was certainly harassing it," Helena said with satisfaction. "Owls are remarkably good at aerial attacks when properly motivated. Claws to the eyes, sharp beak to sensitive areas. Trolls may be large and strong, but they're not particularly good at dealing with fast-moving aerial threats. What else?" "Second year was particularly challenging," Helena continued. "The basilisk was hunting Muggleborns, and you were hearing voices in the walls. I spent most of that year flying patrol routes through the castle, trying to track the creature's movements and warn potential victims away from dangerous areas." "Is that why you were always so tired that year?" "I was barely sleeping. Every night I'd patrol the corridors, looking for signs of the basilisk's passage, trying to predict where it might strike next. And during the day, I was watching you, making sure the voices you were hearing weren't driving you toward something dangerous." Helena's expression grew grim. "I was so afraid, Harry. I could hear the basilisk too, sometimes, when it was moving through the walls. And I knew that if it targeted you specifically, there would be very little I could do to protect you. A basilisk's gaze is death to any creature that meets its eyes directly, and its venom is lethal, even in tiny amounts. But you stayed close anyway. I stayed as close as I dared. When you went into the Chamber of Secrets to save Ginny, I followed you as far as I could. I couldn't enter the chamber itself. The entrance was too small, and besides, I would have been just another liability in there. But I waited at the entrance, ready to go for help if you didn't come back. Harry thought about that terrifying journey into the chamber, the fear and desperation he'd felt facing the basilisk alone. It was somehow comforting to know that Helena had been there, even if she hadn't been able to help directly. You said you alerted Dumbledore to dangers. What did you mean? Ah, Helena said, and her tone became distinctly cooler. That's a more complicated story. You see, I couldn't communicate with Dumbledore directly without revealing who I was, but I could leave hints. When I discovered something that posed a threat to you, I would find ways to bring it to his attention. Like what? Like the cursed objects that Lucius Malfoy had been slipping into Diagon Alley shops, hoping one of them would end up in your hands. I made sure those objects ended up on Dumbledore's desk instead, or the letters from Death Eater sympathizers that were being sent to you at Hogwarts. I intercepted them and delivered them to the headmaster's office. Helena's expression darkened. Though I must say, Dumbledore's response to these warnings was often insufficient. He seemed more interested in letting you face dangers than in preventing them entirely. What do you mean? I mean that there were times when I provided him with information that could have prevented you from being put in harm's way, and he chose not to act on it. The Philosopher's Stone, for instance. I knew Quirrell was acting strangely, knew there was something wrong about his behavior around you. I left evidence of his suspicious activities where Dumbledore was sure to find it. But he didn't stop Quirrell? He let events play out as they did, Helena said, her voice tight with old frustration. Just as he let you face the basilisk, just as he's allowed you to stumble through every crisis largely unprepared. It's almost as if he wants you to face these challenges, as if he believes the struggle itself is somehow necessary for your development. Harry felt a familiar anger stirring in his chest. He's been testing me. I think he's been preparing you, Helena corrected, though her tone suggested she didn't entirely approve. The question is preparing you for what, exactly, and whether the methods he's chosen are worth the cost. They sat in silence for a moment, both lost in thoughts of manipulation and protection, and the complex motivations of adults who claimed to have Harry's best interests at heart. You said you guided my mail, Harry said eventually. How? Helena's expression lightened slightly. That was actually one of the more straightforward parts of my protection. Owlpost works through magical navigation. We instinctively know how to find the intended recipient of any letter we're carrying, but that navigation can be influenced by a skilled animagus who understands the system. Meaning? Meaning I made sure certain letters never reached you, and that others arrived exactly when you needed them most. The worst of the hate mail from Daily Prophet readers after the Triwizard Tournament coverage, for instance. The letters from Death Eater sympathizers who thought sending threats to a 14-year-old was appropriate. The various attempts by Rita Skeeter and her colleagues to manipulate you into giving interviews. You intercepted my mail? I intercepted the mail that was designed to hurt or manipulate you, Helena clarified. Your letters from friends, from Mrs. Weasley, from Sirius, those I delivered without interference, but the letters meant to cause you pain or fear. Those ended up in the fire. Harry thought about all the times he'd wondered why he received so few letters at Privet Drive, why his correspondence seemed limited to a small circle of friends and Order members. How much hate mail was there? More than you needed to deal with, Helena said gently. Especially after the Triwizard Tournament and the Daily Prophet's campaign against you. People were writing to call you a liar, a fraud, an attention seeker. Some of the letters contained curses or hexes. A few contained actual threats of violence. Harry felt his stomach clench. Threats? Nothing that posed a real danger, Helena assured him quickly. Mostly just angry people venting their frustrations on paper. But you didn't need to read their poison, and I saw no reason to let their hatred into your life when I could prevent it. Thank you, Harry said softly. I don't think I could have handled that on top of everything else. You shouldn't have to handle it, Helena said firmly. You're a child, Harry, not a public figure who signed up for that kind of scrutiny. The fact that the wizarding world treats you as both a celebrity and a target is appalling. What about the letters you made sure I received at the right times? Ah, now that was more delicate work, Helena said with a smile. Timing is everything in correspondence. A letter of encouragement that arrives the day after you need it is much less effective than one that arrives just when your spirits are at their lowest. She settled back against his headboard, clearly warming to the topic. I would hold on to certain letters from your friends, the ones full of love and support and reminders that you weren't alone, and deliver them on days when you were particularly struggling. The morning after a nightmare, for instance, or when you'd had a particularly difficult day with the Dursleys. I always wondered about that, Harry admitted. Sometimes it felt like the letters arrived at exactly the right moment, like my friends somehow knew when I needed to hear from them. Your friends do care about you deeply, but they're not mind readers, Helena said fondly. They were just lucky enough to have a postal service that understood the importance of emotional timing. What else did you do? Besides mail and protection and harassment of school trolls? Helena laughed, the sound warm and delighted. Oh, I was quite busy. I scouted locations for your various adventures, making sure you didn't walk into any traps I could detect. I eavesdropped on conversations that might have posed a threat to you. I even did some investigative work of my own, following suspicious characters, gathering intelligence on Death Eater activities, that sort of thing. You were spying. I was gathering information, Helena corrected with mock dignity. And it's remarkable what people will say around an owl, as if we can't understand human speech. I learned quite a lot about various plots and schemes simply by perching in the right places at the right times. Such as... Well, I was the one who discovered that Peter Pettigrew was alive and hiding as the Weasleys' pet rat, for instance. Though unfortunately, I had no way to communicate that information to anyone who could act on it at the time. Harry's eyes widened. You knew about Scabbers? I knew there was something deeply wrong about that rat from the moment I first saw him, Helena said grimly. His scent was all wrong. Too intelligent, too aware, too human. I tried to catch him several times during your stays at the Burrow, but he was remarkably good at avoiding me. Why didn't you tell someone? How could I? I was an owl, Harry. I couldn't exactly send a letter explaining that the Weasleys' pet rat was actually a Death Eater in disguise, and transforming to human form just to deliver that information would have meant revealing my identity years before it was safe to do so. Helena's expression grew frustrated. That was one of the most maddening aspects of maintaining my cover, knowing things that could have helped you or your friends, but being unable to share them without compromising my ability to protect you. It must have been torture, Harry said softly. It was, Helena admitted. Watching you struggle with problems I could have solved, seeing you hurt by situations I could have prevented, that was far harder than any physical discomfort or magical strain. There were so many times I wanted to transform, to comfort you properly, to give you the guidance and support you needed. Why didn't you? Helena was quiet for a long moment, her amber eyes distant with memory. Because every time I was tempted, I remembered what your mother made me promise. She didn't ask me to make your life easier, Harry. She asked me to keep you alive and safe until you were strong enough to protect yourself. And she was very specific about what that meant. What did she say? She said that you would need to learn to be brave on your own, to trust your own instincts, to develop your own strength and wisdom. She was terrified that the adults in your life would try to shield you from every challenge, that they would treat you like a fragile thing to be protected, rather than a young person who needed to grow and learn. Helena's voice grew soft with remembered love and loss. Your mother wanted you to have a childhood, but she also wanted you to develop the skills and strength you'd need as an adult. She was afraid that if everyone around you made decisions for you, solved your problems for you, fought your battles for you, you'd never learn to do those things yourself. So she asked you to watch over me without interfering. She asked me to protect you from dangers you couldn't possibly handle on your own, while allowing you to face the challenges that would help you grow. It was a delicate balance. Harry thought about all the times over the past 3 years when he'd felt utterly alone, when he'd been forced to rely on his own courage and quick thinking to survive. It had been terrifying, but it had also taught him things about himself that he wouldn't have learned any other way. She was right, he said quietly. Wasn't she? About needing to learn to be strong on my own. She was brilliant, Helena agreed. Though there were times when I questioned her wisdom. When I watched you crying yourself to sleep night after night, when I saw how lonely and scared you were, I wondered if she'd asked too much of both of us. But you kept the promise anyway. I kept the promise, Helena confirmed, even when it nearly broke my heart, even when every instinct I had screamed at me to comfort you, to reveal myself, to take away your pain. I kept faith with your mother's wishes, because I trusted her judgment, even when my own feelings were telling me to do something different. Harry felt a profound sense of awe at the depth of Helena's love and sacrifice. She'd spent 3 years fighting against her own protective instincts, forcing herself to watch him suffer when she could have eased his pain with a single transformation. "How did you bear it?" he whispered. "By focusing on the goal," Helena said simply. "Every night when you cried, I reminded myself that you were alive and safe and growing stronger. Every day when you faced some new challenge, I told myself that you were learning skills you'd need for the battles ahead. And when the loneliness became unbearable, I remembered that my sacrifice was nothing compared to what your mother had given up for you." "But it wasn't nothing," Harry protested. "You gave up years of your life, your freedom, your very identity. That's not nothing." Helena smiled, and it was radiant with love and pride. "No, Harry, I gave up Helena Whitmore the person, but I gained something far more precious. I got to watch you grow up. I got to see you take your first steps into the magical world, make your first real friends, discover your talents and strengths. I got to witness you becoming the brave, kind, loyal young man your mother always believed you could be. You really don't regret it?" "I regret the pain you've suffered," Helena said firmly. "I regret that Dumbledore's choices have made your life harder than it needed to be. I regret that you've had to face dangers that no child should have to handle. But do I regret keeping my promise to your mother? Do I regret spending 3 years as your companion and protector? Never." Harry felt tears streaming down his face again, overwhelmed by the depth of her love and the magnitude of her sacrifice. "I don't deserve this," he whispered. "I don't deserve to have someone love me that much." Helena reached out and cupped his face gently, her amber eyes blazing with fierce tenderness. "You deserve everything, Harry James Potter. You deserve love and protection and family and joy. You deserve to know how profoundly you're cherished. How many people would do anything to keep you safe and happy? I've felt so alone for so long." "I know," Helena said, and her voice was thick with regret and love. "I know, and I'm so sorry. But you were never really alone, dear one. Never for a single moment. I was always there, always watching, always ready to do whatever was necessary to protect you." "Even now?" Harry asked, suddenly afraid that this revelation would change everything, that Helena would consider her promise fulfilled now that she'd revealed herself. Helena's smile was brilliant and reassuring. Especially now. The dangers you face are only going to get worse as you get older, Harry. Voldemort isn't gone forever, and his followers are still out there, waiting for his return. You're going to need someone who understands the full scope of what you're dealing with, someone who can help you prepare for what's coming. And you'll do that, even if it means defying Dumbledore? I've been defying Dumbledore's plans for 3 years already, Helena said with a grin that was pure mischief. What's a little more rebellion in service of keeping my promise to your mother? Harry laughed despite his tears, feeling lighter and more hopeful than he had in years. For the first time in his life, he had someone who was entirely on his side, someone whose primary loyalty was to him rather than to any cause or philosophy. Why now? He asked. Why reveal yourself today, on my birthday? Helena's expression grew serious again. Because 13 is when a witch or wizard begins to come into their full magical inheritance. Your powers are going to start developing rapidly now, and you're going to face new challenges that require more than just survival instincts. You need someone who can help you understand your heritage, your abilities, and your choices. And because? And because you needed to know that you're loved, Helena said simply. You needed to know that your mother's love didn't die with her, that there's someone in this world who knows exactly who you are and cares about you unconditionally. Harry felt his heart clench with overwhelming emotion. Thank you, he whispered. For everything. For the promise, for the sacrifice, for revealing yourself now. For loving me when no one else would. Oh, Harry, Helena said, pulling him into a fierce hug. You are so loved. More than you know, more than you can possibly imagine. And now that you know the truth, we can begin to reclaim everything that was meant to be yours. As Harry clung to her, feeling truly safe and loved for the first time in 13 years, he began to understand that this was only the beginning. Helena had revealed herself, not just to comfort him, but to prepare him for whatever came next. And for the first time in his life, he felt ready to face it with someone who would stand by him, no matter what. Chapter 5. Magical Awakening. The morning after Helena's revelation found Harry lying awake in his bed before dawn, staring at the ceiling and trying to process everything that had changed in his life. The events of the previous day felt surreal, like something from a particularly vivid dream. But when he turned his head toward his desk, there was Helena in human form, curled up in the chair with a worn leather journal in her lap, reading by the light of a softly glowing orb that hovered near her shoulder. She looked up as he stirred, and her amber eyes were warm with affection and something else, a kind of eager anticipation that made Harry's stomach flutter with nervous excitement. Good morning, she said softly, closing the journal and setting it aside. How did you sleep? Better than I have in years, Harry admitted. And it was true. For the first time since he could remember, he'd fallen asleep feeling truly safe, knowing that someone who loved him was watching over him. What are you reading? Helena's expression grew both sad and excited. Your mother's research notes. I've been going through them, deciding where to start your real magical education. Harry sat up quickly, suddenly wide awake. Mum's research notes. You have them here? I've had them all along, Helena said with a small smile. Hidden in plain sight, you might say. Do you remember how Hedwig's nest always seemed unusually large for an owl? How I was always rearranging the materials? Harry nodded, thinking of the elaborate construction of twigs, soft materials, and what he'd assumed were simply nesting decorations that Helena had maintained in the corner of his room. Those weren't random nesting materials, Helena continued. They were a carefully constructed hiding place, warded with protective charms that would make them invisible to anyone who didn't know exactly what to look for. Your mother's journals, her research notes, even some of her personal belongings. I've been keeping them safe for 13 years, waiting for the day when you'd be ready to claim your inheritance." Harry felt his chest tighten with emotion. "Can I see them?" "That's why I'm here," Helena said, standing and extending her hand to him. "It's time for you to learn magic the way your mother wanted you to. Not the limited, carefully controlled curriculum they teach at Hogwarts, but the real art and science of wizardry." Harry climbed out of bed and took her hand, marveling at the warmth of her skin and the way her fingers fit so perfectly with his. She led him to the corner where Hedwig's nest had always been, and with a whispered word and a graceful gesture, the entire construction shimmered and transformed. Where before there had been a simple owl's nest, now there was an elegant wooden chest, carved with intricate symbols that seemed to pulse with their own inner light. Helena opened it carefully, and Harry gasped at the contents. Dozens of journals bound in rich leather, rolled parchments covered in his mother's elegant handwriting, small glass vials filled with shimmering potions, and what looked like several pieces of delicate magical instruments. "This is incredible," Harry breathed, reaching out to touch one of the journals with reverent fingers. "Your mother was many things," Helena said softly. "But perhaps most importantly, she was a researcher and innovator. She didn't just learn magic. She pushed its boundaries, developed new applications, found ways to combine different disciplines in ways that had never been attempted before." Helena pulled out a thick journal, bound in emerald green leather, and handed it to Harry. "This one contains her notes on protective magic, the research that ultimately saved your life. But there are others on healing, on transfiguration theory, on the deep connections between different forms of magic." Harry opened the journal carefully, and immediately recognized his mother's handwriting from the few samples he'd seen. But this was different from the brief notes and homework assignments he'd glimpsed in their school books. This was the work of a mature witch, pushing the boundaries of magical knowledge. "Protective magic," he read aloud from the first page, "is not simply about creating barriers between oneself and harm. True protection comes from understanding the fundamental forces that bind magic to emotion, will to reality, love to power." "Your mother believed that magic was ultimately about connection," Helena explained, settling beside him on his bed and pointing to a detailed diagram on the facing page. "Not just the connection between wizard and wand, but between the caster and the subject, between intention and result, between love and power. Is that why her protection worked so well? Because it was based on love. Partly, but it was more complex than that. Look here." Helena traced her finger along a series of equations that looked like nothing Harry had ever seen in his magical education. "Your mother developed a way to bind emotional resonance directly into magical structures. The protection she placed on you wasn't just powered by her love. It was literally constructed from it." Harry studied the diagrams, trying to understand the intricate relationship between the mathematical notations and the flowing descriptions of emotional and magical theory. It was far beyond anything they'd covered at Hogwarts, but somehow it felt familiar, as if some part of him recognized the underlying principles. "I want to learn this," he said suddenly, looking up at Helena with determination blazing in his green eyes. "All of it. Everything she wanted to teach me." Helena's smile was radiant. "I was hoping you'd say that. But Harry, you need to understand, this isn't going to be like your classes at Hogwarts. The magic your mother was developing is advanced, sometimes dangerous, and it requires not just intellectual understanding, but emotional maturity and exceptional magical control." "I'm ready," Harry said firmly. "I think you might be," Helena agreed. Then her expression grew more serious. "But we're going to start with the basics and work our way up carefully. The last thing I want is for you to hurt yourself because we moved too quickly." She stood up and moved to the center of his small bedroom, gesturing for him to join her. Before we can begin working with your mother's advanced theories, we need to assess your current magical abilities and help you develop better control. What do you mean? I mean that most young wizards learn magic through their wands, using the wand as a focus and channel for their power. But your mother believed that true magical mastery required learning to work with magic directly, to understand and control your own magical signature without relying entirely on external tools. Helena extended her hand, palm up, and suddenly a small flame danced above her skin. Not the orange-red of normal fire, but a soft silver flame that cast no heat, but filled the room with gentle warmth. Wandless magic, Harry breathed, awed by the effortless control she displayed. The foundation of all advanced magical work, Helena confirmed, closing her hand and extinguishing the flame. Your mother mastered it during her 6th year at Hogwarts, and she intended to teach it to you as soon as you were old enough to understand the principles. Can you teach me? I can try, Helena said with a smile. But first, I need to understand your current magical signature. Everyone's magic feels different, Harry. It has its own rhythm, its own flavor, its own particular strengths and tendencies. Before I can help you develop new abilities, I need to know what we're working with. She moved closer to him, close enough that he could smell the faint scent of clean feathers and something floral that reminded him of spring mornings. Give me your hands, she said softly. Harry extended his hands toward her, and when her fingers touched his, he gasped. It felt like touching a live wire, but pleasant. A warm, tingling sensation that seemed to race up his arms and settle in his chest like a second heartbeat. Helena's eyes widened in surprise, then filled with wonder and something that might have been awe. "Oh, Harry," she whispered, "your magical signature. It's extraordinary." "What do you mean?" "Most wizards have magic that feels like a single note," Helena explained, her hand still gently clasping his. "Clear, distinct, recognizable. But yours is like a symphony. There are layers upon layers, harmonies and counterpoints and melodies all woven together." She closed her eyes, and Harry felt her magic reaching out to touch his, gentle and exploratory. "There's your father's magic here, bold and bright and warm, like sunlight on a summer day. But underneath it, there's your mother's signature too, complex and nurturing and incredibly powerful. I have both their magical signatures?" "More than that," Helena said, opening her amber eyes and meeting his gaze. "You have their signatures, but they've combined and evolved into something entirely new, something that's purely you, but carries the best of both your parents." The way she looked at him made Harry's breath catch. There was admiration in her gaze, and pride, and something deeper that made his heart race in a way he didn't entirely understand. "What does that mean for learning magic?" "It means you have the potential to be exceptional," Helena said, releasing his hands but remaining close enough that he could feel the warmth radiating from her skin. "Your mother's theoretical brilliance, your father's intuitive power, and your own unique innovations. But it also means we need to be very careful about how we develop your abilities." "Why?" "Because raw magical power without proper control can be dangerous," Helena explained, moving back to Lily's chest and pulling out what looked like a set of delicate silver instruments. "And because the kind of magic your mother was developing, the magic that saved your life, requires not just power, but perfect emotional and mental balance." She arranged the instruments on his desk, and Harry saw that they were designed to measure and monitor magical emanations. "We're going to start with exercises designed to help you feel and control your magic directly, without your wand. Once you can do that reliably, we'll move on to basic wandless spells, then gradually work our way up to more advanced applications." "How long will it take?" Helena smiled. "That depends entirely on you. Some of these techniques took your mother months to master. Others she picked up in a matter of days. But Harry, her expression grew serious again. This training is going to be intense and sometimes frustrating. You're going to fail repeatedly before you succeed, and some of the exercises might be emotionally as well as magically challenging. I don't care, Harry said firmly. I want to learn everything. I want to understand what she was trying to teach me. Then let's begin, Helena said, and her voice carried a note of excitement that made Harry's pulse quicken. The first exercise was deceptively simple. Helena had him sit cross-legged on his bed, close his eyes, and simply try to feel his own magic without casting any spells or even touching his wand. Magic isn't separate from you, she explained, her voice taking on the rhythm of a patient teacher. It's part of you, like your heartbeat or your breathing. Most wizards learn to push their magic out through their wands to create effects in the external world, but they never learn to sense and control the magic within themselves. Harry tried to follow her instructions, but at first all he could feel was his own frustration. He sat there for what felt like hours, eyes closed, trying to sense something that seemed completely elusive. I can't feel anything, he said finally, opening his eyes to find Helena watching him with patient understanding. That's normal, she assured him. You've been trained to think of magic as something that happens when you wave your wand and speak an incantation. Learning to feel your internal magic is like learning to hear your own heartbeat. It's always there. But most people never pay attention to it. She moved to sit beside him on the bed, close enough that their knees almost touched. Close your eyes again, she said softly. But this time, don't try to find your magic. Just breathe, and think about how you feel when you are casting a spell you love. Harry closed his eyes and thought about the Patronus charm, about the surge of joy and determination he felt when he called forth his stag. Almost immediately, he felt a warm glow in his chest, like swallowing sunshine. There, Helena said, and her voice was full of quiet triumph. Do you feel that warmth in your chest? Yes, Harry whispered, afraid that speaking too loudly might make the sensation disappear. That's your magic, Helena explained. That feeling of warmth and light and potential, that's what your magical core feels like from the inside. Now, try to make it stronger. Harry focused on the warm feeling, imagining it growing brighter and warmer. To his amazement, the sensation responded to his attention, expanding until it felt like his entire torso was glowing from within. Excellent, Helena breathed. Now try to move it. Imagine the warmth flowing down your arms, into your hands. It took several attempts, but eventually Harry managed to direct the warm, tingling sensation down through his shoulders and arms until his hands felt alive with magical energy. Open your eyes, Helena said softly. When Harry did, he gasped. His hands were glowing with a faint golden light, and the air around his fingers shimmered like heat waves. That's your magical aura, Helena explained, her voice full of pride and excitement. You're seeing your own magic made visible. Most wizards never learn to do this, Harry. It usually takes years of advanced training. Why is it so easy for me? Because you have a very strong magical core, and because you're naturally intuitive about energy work, Helena said, but also because your mother's protection is still part of you, and it recognizes what we're trying to do. Mum's protection is still active? In a modified form, yes. The original protection that deflected Voldemort's curse evolved as you grew older, becoming less of a shield against external threats and more of an enhancement to your own magical abilities. Helena reached out and gently touched his glowing hands, and Harry felt a jolt of connection that made his magical aura flare brighter. She designed it to help you learn and grow into your full potential. The contact between them sent a shock of sensation through Harry that had nothing to do with magic and everything to do with the way Helena's eyes seemed to glow in the reflected light of his aura. For a moment, he found himself staring at her lips, wondering what it would feel like to... He jerked his hands back, embarrassed by the direction of his thoughts, and the magical glow immediately faded. "Sorry," he mumbled, his cheeks burning with mortification. Helena's expression was gentle and understanding. "There's nothing to apologize for, Harry. Magic and emotion are closely connected, especially when you're learning to work with energy directly. It's perfectly normal to have unexpected reactions." The way she said it made Harry wonder if she'd felt the same jolt of awareness he had, but he didn't dare ask. "Should we continue?" he said instead, trying to regain his composure. "Let's try something different," Helena suggested, moving to retrieve one of Lily's journals. "I think you're ready to attempt your first wandless spell." "Really?" "Really. But we're going to start with something simple and safe." She opened the journal to a page covered with diagrams and neat annotations. "Your mother developed a variation of the Lumos charm that works particularly well for wandless casting. It's designed to respond to emotional resonance rather than just magical power." Helena showed him the incantation, not the standard Lumos he knew from school, but a more complex phrase in what sounded like Latin mixed with something else. "Lux cordis mei," she pronounced carefully, and a soft, warm light appeared above her palm. "Light of my heart." The spell responds to genuine feeling rather than just magical intent. Harry tried to copy her pronunciation, focusing on the warm feeling in his chest while he spoke the words. Nothing happened on his first attempt, or his second, but on the third try, a tiny spark of golden light flickered above his palm before winking out. "Brilliant!" Helena exclaimed, her face lighting up with joy. "Harry, do you realize what you just did? You cast a wandless spell on your third attempt. Most adult wizards can't do that after months of practice." It felt... Harry paused, trying to find the right words. It felt like the magic wanted to work, like it was just waiting for me to figure out how to let it. "That's exactly right," Helena said, and she looked so proud that Harry felt his chest swell with happiness. "Your mother always said that the best magic was collaborative, that instead of forcing magic to do what you wanted, you should invite it to work with you toward a common goal." They spent the rest of the morning working on variations of the light spell, with Helena guiding Harry through the principles of emotional resonance and energy direction. By lunchtime, he could create a steady, controllable light in either hand, and he was beginning to understand how different emotions affected the color and intensity of the illumination. "You're a remarkably quick study," Helena observed as they took a break, sharing sandwiches that she'd somehow produced from thin air. "But then, I suppose I shouldn't be surprised. Your parents were both exceptional students, and you've inherited their natural aptitude, along with their magical signatures." "What were they like as students?" Harry asked, grateful for any excuse to learn more about his parents. "I mean, I know Dad was good at transfiguration and Quidditch, and Mum was brilliant at charms and potions. But what were they actually like in class?" Helena's expression grew fond and nostalgic. "Your father was the kind of student who grasped concepts instantly, but rarely bothered with homework, unless it interested him personally. He had an intuitive understanding of magic that let him perform spells perfectly after seeing them demonstrated once, but ask him to write an essay about the theoretical foundations, and he'd put it off until the last possible moment." "And Mum?" "Your mother was the opposite. She wanted to understand everything completely before she attempted to put it into practice. She'd read every available text on a subject, take detailed notes, create her own study guides, and only then feel comfortable trying the actual spell work." Helena smiled. But once she understood something, she could modify it, improve it, combine it with other magic in ways that amazed even the professors. They sound like they complemented each other well. They did, eventually, though it took them a while to appreciate each other's different approaches to learning. Helena paused to take a sip of what appeared to be perfectly brewed tea. Your father thought your mother was overly cautious and theoretical. Your mother thought your father was reckless and lazy. It wasn't until 6th year that they began to see how their different strengths could work together. What changed? A particularly challenging project in advanced transfiguration, Helena said with a grin. Professor McGonagall assigned them as partners specifically because their approaches were so different, and she thought they needed to learn from each other. They spent weeks arguing about methodology before they finally figured out how to combine James's intuitive spellcasting with Lily's theoretical knowledge. And that's when they started getting along? That's when they started respecting each other, Helena corrected. The romantic attraction came later, after they'd learned to be friends and intellectual equals. The way she said it made Harry wonder about his own growing feelings toward Helena. The attraction he'd felt during their magical training had been undeniable, but it was built on a foundation of respect and admiration that had been developing for years without his conscious awareness. "Helena," he said carefully, not sure how to phrase what he wanted to ask. "Yes? The connection I felt when we were working with magic, is that normal? Between teachers and students, I mean?" Helena was quiet for a long moment, her amber eyes thoughtful. "Magical resonance between compatible practitioners is well documented," she said finally. "But what you felt, what we both felt, that was more than just educational compatibility. What was it then?" "I think," Helena said carefully, "that it was recognition, your magic recognizing mine, and vice versa. The kind of deep compatibility that forms the basis of the most powerful magical partnerships." "Like Mum and Dad had?" "Similar," Helena agreed, "though the circumstances are obviously quite different." There was something in her tone that made Harry look at her more closely, and he was surprised to see a faint flush in her cheeks. The realization that she might be feeling the same confused attraction he was sent a thrill of excitement through him, followed immediately by uncertainty about what it meant. "Are we going to continue with the training?" he asked, partly to change the subject, and partly because he was genuinely eager to learn more. "Absolutely," Helena said, standing up and moving back to Lily's collection of research materials. "This afternoon, I want to show you some of the theoretical foundations behind your mother's protective magic. Understanding the principles will help you develop your own applications." She pulled out a journal, bound in deep blue leather, and opened it to a page covered with intricate diagrams that looked like a cross between spell matrices and architectural blueprints. "These are ward structures," she explained, setting the journal where Harry could see it clearly. "Your mother was particularly interested in protective magic that could adapt and evolve rather than simply providing static defense." Harry studied the diagrams, noting how they seemed to flow and change even as he watched them. "They're moving. That's because they're not just drawings. They're magical constructs embedded in the page," Helena said. "Your mother developed a way to preserve active spell structures in written form so they could be studied and modified without having to cast them repeatedly. That's incredible." "It's revolutionary," Helena corrected. "This technique alone could transform how magical education is conducted if it were ever made public. But your mother was more interested in using it for her research than in seeking recognition." She traced one of the flowing patterns with her finger, and it began to glow with soft blue light. "This particular ward is designed to protect against emotional manipulation, curses that affect mood or mental state. Your mother developed it after studying the effects of Dementor exposure." "She studied Dementors?" "She studied everything that posed a potential threat to the people she loved," Helena said softly. "After you were born, she became somewhat obsessed with developing protections against every form of dark magic she could imagine. This ward structure is part of what protected you from the emotional effects of the Dementors during your encounter with them." Harry felt a chill of recognition. "The protection is still active?" Modified and evolved, but yes. Your mother's love didn't just save you from Voldemort. It's been protecting you from dozens of different threats throughout your life, adapting to new dangers as you encounter them. How is that possible? Because she didn't just cast a single protective spell, Helena explained, turning to another page filled with even more complex diagrams. She wove an entire network of interconnected protections, each one designed to trigger under specific circumstances and evolve based on your experiences. The scope of his mother's work was staggering. Harry felt overwhelmed by the complexity of what she'd created, but also profoundly moved by the depth of love and planning it represented. She really thought of everything, didn't she? She tried to, Helena said gently. Though I think even she would be amazed by how well her protections have adapted to circumstances she couldn't possibly have anticipated. They spent the afternoon working through the theoretical foundations of protective magic, with Helena explaining principles that wouldn't be covered in the Hogwarts curriculum until 7th year. If at all, Harry found himself absorbing the information with surprising ease, as if some part of him had been waiting his entire life to understand these concepts. By evening, he was mentally exhausted, but exhilarated. He felt like he'd learned more about magic in a single day than he had in 3 years at Hogwarts, and more importantly, he felt connected to his mother's legacy in a way that went beyond simple inheritance. "How are you feeling?" Helena asked, as they put away the journals and instruments. "Like I'm finally learning who I'm supposed to be," Harry said honestly. "Like all this time, I've been living as only a fraction of myself." Helena's smile was radiant with pride and affection. "That's exactly what your mother hoped you'd discover. She wanted you to understand that being Harry Potter meant more than just being the boy who lived. It meant being heir to a tradition of magical innovation and protective love that goes back generations." "Will you keep teaching me?" Harry asked, suddenly afraid that this day had been a one-time gift. "Every day," Helena promised, and something in her voice made his heart race again. "We have years of work ahead of us, Harry. Your magical education has only just begun." As she transformed back into Hedwig for the night, Harry lay in his bed thinking about everything that had changed. He was learning magic at a level he'd never imagined possible, connected to his parents' legacy in ways that made him feel less alone than he ever had before. But underneath all of that, there was something else, a growing awareness of Helena as more than just his teacher and protector. The way she looked at him when he successfully mastered a new technique, the electricity he felt when their hands touched during magical exercises, the way his heart raced when she smiled at him with that particular expression of pride and affection. He was 13 years old, on the verge of discoveries that would reshape his understanding of himself and his place in the wizarding world. And for the first time in his life, he had someone who would be with him every step of the way. Someone who loved him unconditionally and believed in his potential. Whatever came next, Harry Potter was no longer facing it alone. Chapter 6. Ministry Complications. The magical disturbance alarms began shrieking at the Ministry of Magic at precisely 11:43 on a Tuesday morning, sending junior officials scrambling through corridors and senior administrators reaching for emergency protocols that hadn't been activated since the last confirmed dark arts incident 6 months prior. In the improper use of magic office, Arthur Weasley looked up from his morning correspondence with the weary resignation of a man who had learned not to hope for quiet days. "Underage magic detection, sir," his assistant called out, waving a parchment that was still smoking with urgency enchantments. "Massive surge from Little Whinging, sorry. The readings are—" She paused, squinting at the measurements. "Unprecedented." Arthur sighed and set down his quill. Little Whinging could only mean one thing. Harry Potter was in trouble again. "How unprecedented are we talking?" "The magical resonance is off the charts, sir. Multiple complex spells being performed simultaneously, advanced techniques that shouldn't be possible for a 13-year-old wizard, and—" She hesitated, Signature analysis suggests the magic isn't entirely coming from a single source. Arthur felt his blood chill. If Harry was being magically attacked at his relative's home, if Death Eaters had somehow found him despite all the protections. Send an immediate alert to Dumbledore, and prepare an emergency response team. I'm going to Privet Drive, personally. Sir, shouldn't we wait for authorization from— There's no time, Arthur interrupted, grabbing his travelling cloak. If Harry Potter is under magical attack, every second counts. The apparition point nearest to Privet Drive was a small park 3 blocks from number 4, warded heavily to prevent magical detection, but close enough for rapid response. Arthur materialized behind a grove of trees and immediately felt the magical disturbance that had triggered the alarms, waves of complex, layered magic that seemed to pulse with extraordinary power and sophistication. But as he made his way carefully toward the Potter boy's address, Arthur realized that the magic didn't feel hostile. It felt educational, structured, like the magical emanations from Hogwarts during advanced practical examinations. Number 4, Privet Drive, looked exactly as normal as every other house on the street. Neat garden, tidy facade, absolutely no indication that anything unusual was occurring within. But Arthur's magical senses told a different story. The house practically hummed with active spellwork, and there were protective wards layered around the building that he recognized as being far beyond anything the Dursleys could have arranged. Arthur approached the front door cautiously, his wand ready but not drawn. Whatever was happening here, he had a feeling it was more complicated than a simple case of underage magic violation. He knocked firmly, and after a moment heard footsteps approaching. The door opened to reveal Harry Potter, looking surprised but not panicked, wearing clothes that actually fit him properly for once, and carrying himself with a confidence Arthur didn't remember seeing before. "Mr. Weasley?" Harry said, genuine confusion in his voice. "What are you doing here? Is everything all right? Is Ron okay?" "Ron's fine, Harry," Arthur assured him, though he was studying the boy carefully. There was something different about him, a sense of centeredness and quiet power that hadn't been there at the end of the school year. "I'm here about the magical activity that's been detected from this address. Quite powerful spells being performed, apparently." Harry's expression grew guarded. "I haven't done anything illegal." "I'm sure you haven't," Arthur said gently. "But the Ministry needs to investigate any significant magical activity involving underage wizards. May I come in?" Harry hesitated, and Arthur caught a glimpse of something like protective anxiety in the boy's green eyes. Yes, of course. But Mr. Weasley, I should warn you that the situation here is complicated." Arthur followed Harry into the house, noting immediately that the oppressive atmosphere he remembered from his previous visit was completely gone. The house felt warm and welcoming in a way that seemed utterly at odds with what he knew about Harry's relatives. "Are your aunt and uncle at home?" Arthur asked as they moved toward the sitting room. "They're visiting Aunt Marge for the week," Harry said. "It's just me here." "Just you?" Arthur frowned. "Harry, who's been performing the advanced magic we detected? Some of those spells are 7th year level at minimum." Harry stopped in the doorway to the sitting room and turned to face Arthur with an expression of determination mixed with apprehension. "Mr. Weasley, before you see anything else, I need you to understand that what's happening here isn't dangerous. No one is being hurt. No dark magic is being practiced, and I'm safer than I've ever been in my life." "Harry, what?" Arthur's question died in his throat as he stepped into the sitting room and saw the woman sitting by the window. She was young, perhaps in her early 20s, with silvery white hair and amber eyes that seemed to glow with inner light. She was beautiful in an otherworldly way, and the air around her practically shimmered with magical power. "Mr. Weasley," Harry said carefully, "I'd like you to meet Helena Whitmore. She's been helping me with my magical education." Helena stood gracefully and inclined her head in a gesture that managed to be respectful without being subservient. "Mr. Weasley, I've heard wonderful things about you from Harry." Arthur stared at her, his mind racing. The magical signature he was sensing from this woman was unlike anything he'd encountered, ancient and powerful, but also warm and protective. And there was something about her that seemed familiar, though he was certain they'd never met. "Ms. Whitmore," he said carefully, "might I ask what your relationship is to Harry, and how you came to be here?" "I'm a friend of his family," Helena said simply. "I made a promise to his mother, many years ago, to watch over him. I'm here to fulfill that promise." "You knew Lily Potter?" "I was her closest friend," Helena confirmed, and the love and grief in her voice were unmistakable. "We were roommates at Hogwarts, and I was with her the night Harry was born." Arthur felt pieces of a puzzle clicking into place, but the picture they formed seemed impossible. "Ms. Whitmore, if you were Lily Potter's friend, why has no one ever mentioned you? Why aren't you in any of the records about the Potter family?" Helena and Harry exchanged a look that spoke of shared secrets and mutual trust. "Because I chose to disappear from the wizarding world after James and Lily died," Helena said quietly. "I had my reasons for maintaining that anonymity until now." "What reasons, Mr. Weasley?" Harry interjected, his voice taking on a protective edge that surprised Arthur with its intensity. "Helena has been protecting me for years. She's taught me more about magic in the past few days than I learned in 3 years at Hogwarts, and she's never done anything that put me in danger." Arthur looked between them, noting the way Harry positioned himself slightly in front of Helena, the fierce loyalty in his voice, the way the woman's expression softened when she looked at the boy. Whatever was happening here, it was clearly important to both of them. "Harry, I believe you," Arthur said gently. "But you have to understand that the Ministry takes these situations very seriously. Powerful adult witches appearing in the homes of famous underage wizards, performing advanced magic without proper registration or oversight. It raises a lot of red flags." "What kind of red flags?" Harry asked, though his tone suggested he already knew he wouldn't like the answer. "Concerns about mind control, dark arts influence, potential kidnapping or manipulation," Arthur said honestly. "I'm not saying that's what's happening here, but those are the concerns the Ministry will have when they learn about this." Helena's amber eyes flashed with something that might have been anger. And what would it take to alleviate those concerns? Documentation of your identity and background, verification of your magical registration, testimony about your intentions regarding Harry, and probably a formal investigation by the Department of Magical Accidents and Catastrophes, Arthur said, hating how official and threatening it sounded. "And if I refuse to submit to such an investigation?" Arthur's expression grew grim. "Then the Ministry will assume you pose a threat to Harry's welfare and will act accordingly." "They'd try to take me away from him," Helena said. "And it wasn't a question. They'd try to separate you, yes. For his protection, they'd argue." Harry's face went white, then flushed with fury. "They can't do that. Helena isn't a threat. She's the only person who's ever truly protected me." "Harry, no!" Harry's voice rose, and Arthur felt the temperature in the room drop several degrees as the boy's magic responded to his emotional state. "I won't let them take her away from me. I won't let them destroy the first good thing that's happened in my life." "Harry, calm down," Helena said gently, moving to place a hand on his shoulder. Immediately, the oppressive feeling of building magic dissipated, though Arthur could still sense the power thrumming just beneath the surface. "I won't lose you," Harry said to Helena, his voice thick with emotion. "I can't. Not after everything." The intimacy in his tone, the way Helena's hand lingered on his shoulder, the protective desperation in his voice, Arthur felt his parental instincts stirring with concern. These two clearly cared deeply for each other, but the dynamic between them seemed complicated. "Ms. Whitmore," Arthur said carefully, "perhaps you could tell me more about your background, your family, your education, your previous whereabouts?" It might help to have some context when I report back to the ministry. Helena's expression grew cold. My family is the pure-blood Whitmore line, though they disowned me during my school years for associating with Muggle-born students. My education was completed at Hogwarts, where I was head girl in my 7th year. As for my previous whereabouts, she smiled tightly. I've been closer to Harry than anyone realized. What does that mean? Helena looked at Harry, who nodded encouragingly. It means, Mr. Weasley, that I'm an unregistered animagus, and that for the past 3 years I've been living as Harry's owl. Arthur stared at her in shock, then understanding crashed over him like a cold wave. Hedwig, he breathed. Hedwig, Helena confirmed. But that's impossible. You'd have to maintain animal form for years without losing your human consciousness. The risks alone. I made a blood oath to Lily Potter to protect her son, Helena said simply. The magic of that oath sustained me through the transformation and helped me maintain my human identity, even while living as an owl. Arthur felt his worldview tilting sideways. You've been watching over Harry this entire time? Every moment, Helena confirmed. Every letter he's sent, every danger he's faced, every night he's cried himself to sleep. I've been there. The implications were staggering. This woman had sacrificed years of her life, her very humanity, to keep a promise to a dead friend. And now the ministry wanted to investigate her as a potential threat? Mr. Weasley, Harry said, his voice earnest and pleading, please don't let them take her away from me. She's not dangerous. She's the person who's kept me alive and safe all these years. She's the only family I have left. Arthur looked at the desperation in Harry's eyes, at the quiet dignity in Helena's expression, and felt his heart clench with sympathy and concern in equal measure. I'll do what I can, he promised. But Harry, you have to understand that this situation is going to attract attention from people who are far less sympathetic than I am. The minister, the department heads, possibly even the Wizengamot. They're all going to want answers. Then we'll give them answers, Helena said firmly. I have nothing to hide, Mr. Weasley. My only crime is loving a 13-year-old boy like the son I never had, and refusing to abandon him to face his burdens alone. Arthur found himself believing her completely. There was something about Helena Whitmore that inspired trust, a sense of absolute sincerity and protective devotion that reminded him powerfully of Lily Potter herself. There's something else, Arthur said reluctantly. The magical signatures we detected, they're not just advanced, they're innovative. Spells that don't match anything in our databases, techniques that seem to combine multiple disciplines in ways that shouldn't be possible. I've been teaching Harry magic that his mother developed, Helena explained. Lily was a brilliant researcher and theorist. Her innovations in protective magic and energy work were years ahead of anything being taught at Hogwarts. And you think Harry should have access to that knowledge? I think Harry deserves to understand his full magical heritage, Helena said fiercely. He's being prepared for battles that most adult wizards couldn't survive. He needs every advantage his parents can give him, not the watered-down curriculum that treats him like a normal student. Arthur thought about the prophecy that Dumbledore had mentioned, about the destiny that waited for Harry Potter, and found himself nodding reluctantly. I'll need to file a report, he said finally. But I'll make sure it reflects what I've observed here. A young man being educated by someone who clearly cares about his welfare, not threatened or manipulated by a stranger with unknown motives. Thank you, Harry said, relief evident in his voice. Don't thank me yet, Arthur warned. My report will buy us some time, but it won't end the matter. The ministry is going to want to interview both of you formally, and they're going to have questions that won't be easy to answer. What kind of questions? Helena asked. About your unregistered animagus status, about the nature of your relationship with Harry, about why you chose to reveal yourself now, rather than remaining hidden, Arthur said honestly. and probably about whether you pose any kind of romantic threat to a minor under your care." Harry's face flushed crimson, and Helena's expression grew carefully neutral in a way that told Arthur his concerns weren't entirely misplaced. "There's nothing inappropriate happening here," Harry said quickly. "Helena has been nothing but protective and respectful." "I believe you," Arthur said gently. "But Harry, you have to understand how this looks to outside observers. A beautiful young woman, living alone with a teenage boy, teaching him advanced magic in secret. It raises questions about boundaries and appropriate relationships." "She's been my owl for 3 years," Harry protested. "It's not like she just appeared out of nowhere to seduce me or something." "I know that, and you know that," Arthur said. "But explaining it to ministry officials who don't know either of you personally, that's going to be more challenging." Helena had remained quiet during this exchange, but now she spoke with quiet determination. "Mr. Weasley, I understand the concerns. I also understand that my presence in Harry's life is going to be scrutinized and questioned by people who don't have his best interests at heart." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that I'm prepared to face whatever investigations, interviews, or legal proceedings the ministry deems necessary. I have nothing to hide and nothing to be ashamed of. I made a promise to protect Harry, and I intend to keep it regardless of the bureaucratic obstacles they place in my way." Arthur found himself impressed by her resolve, though he was also worried about what she might be facing. "Helena, you should know that some of the people you'll be dealing with aren't interested in truth or justice. They're interested in maintaining their own power and authority." "Are you talking about anyone in particular?" "Cornelius Fudge, for one," Arthur said grimly. "The minister doesn't like complications, especially ones that involve Harry Potter. If he sees you as a threat to the ministry's control over Harry's situation, he'll find ways to remove you regardless of the evidence." "Let him try," Harry said fiercely. "I won't let anyone hurt Helena or take her away from me." The protective fury in Harry's voice was unmistakable, and Arthur felt another stab of concern about the intensity of the boy's attachment to his guardian. "Harry, I understand how you feel," Arthur said carefully. "But you need to be prepared for the possibility that the ministry might not see this situation the way you do." "Then the ministry is wrong," Harry said flatly. "Helena has done more to protect me and help me grow than anyone else in my entire life. If they can't see that, it's their problem, not mine." Arthur looked between the two of them, the fiercely protective young woman who had sacrificed her humanity for love, and the equally fierce young man who was clearly prepared to fight the entire ministry to defend her, and felt a mixture of admiration and dread. "There's one more thing," he said reluctantly. "Dumbledore is going to want to speak with both of you about this." Harry's expression grew wary. "What does Dumbledore have to do with it?" "Harry, you're under his magical guardianship as well as being his student," Arthur explained. "Any major changes to your living situation or care arrangements fall under his purview. He's going to want to understand how Helena's presence affects his plans for your protection and development." "His plans," Helena repeated, and there was something dangerous in her tone. "Not Harry's plans, not what Harry wants or needs. His plans." "Helena," Arthur began. "No, let me be clear about something, Mr. Weasley," Helena interrupted, her amber eyes blazing with controlled fury. "I have watched for 3 years as Dumbledore made decisions about Harry's life without consulting him, without considering his emotional needs, without regard for his happiness or autonomy. I have seen a brilliant, brave, loving boy treated as a chess piece in someone else's game. Dumbledore cares about Harry. Dumbledore cares about winning a war," Helena said sharply. "And while I understand the importance of that goal, I refuse to accept that it requires sacrificing Harry's childhood, his emotional development, or his right to make choices about his own life." Arthur felt the truth of her words, even as he worried about the implications of her opposition to the most powerful wizard in Britain. "Helena, I sympathize with your concerns, Arthur said carefully. But Dumbledore isn't your enemy. He's been protecting Harry for years. He's been controlling Harry for years, Helena corrected. There's a difference. What would you have him do differently? I would have him treat Harry like a person instead of a weapon, Helena said fiercely. I would have him give Harry the information and training he needs to make informed decisions about his own life. I would have him consider Harry's happiness and emotional well-being as important as his strategic value in the war against Voldemort. Harry was watching this exchange with growing amazement and obvious gratitude. Arthur could see that Helena was articulating frustrations the boy had felt, but hadn't been able to express himself. "And you think you can do better?" Arthur asked, not challenging but genuinely curious. "I think I can love him without trying to control him," Helena said simply. "I think I can teach him without manipulating him. I think I can protect him while still respecting his autonomy and intelligence." Arthur looked at Harry, who was gazing at Helena with an expression of such profound trust and affection that it made Arthur's chest tight with emotion. "Mr. Weasley," Harry said quietly, "Helena is the first person who's ever treated me like my thoughts and feelings mattered. She's the first person who's ever put my well-being ahead of some greater cause. I know that might be hard to understand, but I need you to know how important she is to me." "I can see that," Arthur said gently. "And Harry, I want you to know that I'm going to do everything I can to help you keep her in your life. Really, really. But I also need both of you to be prepared for the fight that's coming. Because if I know Fudge and the Ministry bureaucracy, this is going to get complicated very quickly." As if summoned by his words, there was a sharp knock at the front door. Arthur felt his heart sink as he recognized the authoritative rhythm of official Ministry business. "That will be the formal investigation team," he said grimly. "Helena, Harry, remember, be honest but careful. Don't volunteer more information than they ask for, and don't let them separate you if you can help it." "What happens if they try to take her away?" Harry asked, fear creeping into his voice. Arthur looked at the fierce determination in Helena's amber eyes, at the protective desperation in Harry's green ones, and felt a surge of resolve that surprised him with its intensity. "Then they'll have to go through all of us," Arthur said firmly. "Because I may work for the Ministry, but I work for justice first, and separating you two wouldn't be justice. It would be cruelty." As footsteps approached the sitting room, Arthur Weasley prepared to defend two people he was only just beginning to understand, against a system he'd served faithfully for years. It wasn't the fight he'd expected to be having when he woke up that morning, but looking at Harry and Helena, seeing their love for each other, their mutual protection, their shared determination to face whatever came next together, he knew it was the right fight to have. The door opened, and Cornelius Fudge stepped into the room with his characteristic blend of bureaucratic authority and barely concealed nervousness. Behind him came a small army of Ministry officials, their expressions ranging from curious to suspicious to openly hostile. "Potter," Fudge said, his voice carrying the false warmth he always used when addressing Harry in public. "We've received some very interesting reports about magical activity at this address." Harry stood up straighter, and Arthur watched as the boy seemed to draw strength from Helena's presence beside him. "Minister," Harry said politely, though his voice carried an edge of steel that Arthur hadn't heard before. "Welcome to my home." Arthur smiled slightly. Whatever happened next, Harry Potter was no longer the frightened, uncertain boy who had stumbled into the wizarding world 3 years ago. He had found his voice, his strength, and someone worth fighting for. The real battle was about to begin. Chapter 7. Understanding James Potter. The Ministry officials had finally left number 4 Privet Drive as the sun was setting, taking with them a mountain of paperwork, several vials of magical essence samples, and what Harry hoped was a grudging acceptance that Helena posed no threat to anyone except possibly those who might try to harm him. The formal investigation would continue, but for now, They were allowed to remain together while the bureaucratic wheels turned. Harry sat on his bed, emotionally drained from hours of questioning, scrutiny, and barely veiled accusations. Helena had handled herself with remarkable grace under the pressure, answering every question with quiet dignity, while never revealing more than absolutely necessary. But Harry could see the strain around her amber eyes, the way her shoulders held tension that hadn't been there that morning. "Are you all right?" he asked softly as she settled beside him, finally allowing herself to relax now that they were alone. "I'm fine," she said, though her voice carried a weariness that suggested the day had taken more out of her than she wanted to admit. "I knew this would happen eventually. I just wish they could see what I see when I look at you." "What do you see?" Helena smiled, and some of the exhaustion faded from her expression. "I see a young man who's grown into someone his parents would be incredibly proud of. Someone who's brave and loyal and kind, despite having every reason to become bitter or cruel." Harry felt his chest warm with her praise, but underneath it was a familiar ache of longing. "I wish I knew more about what they were really like. I mean, you've told me so much about Mum, but Dad—" He trailed off, not sure how to articulate his confusion. "You still have questions about James?" Helena observed gently. "Everyone always tells me I'm just like him," Harry said, his voice carrying a mixture of pride and uncertainty. "But from everything I've heard, he was this confident, popular, talented person who could do anything he set his mind to. And I'm not like that. I'm not naturally gifted at everything, I don't have hundreds of friends, and I definitely don't have his confidence." Helena was quiet for a moment, her amber eyes thoughtful. "Harry, can I share something with you? Something about your father that most people don't know? Please." James Potter was one of the most insecure people I ever met. Harry stared at her in shock. "What?" "Oh, he hid it well," Helena continued with a small smile. "He covered his insecurities with bravado and showmanship and what appeared to be unshakable confidence. But underneath all of that, he was desperately afraid that he wasn't good enough, smart enough, worthy enough for the people he cared about. But he was head boy, and a brilliant Quidditch player, and he worked incredibly hard for all of those things," Helena interrupted gently. "Harry, your father wasn't naturally gifted at magic the way everyone assumes. He was naturally gifted at making things look easy when they weren't." Helena shifted on the bed, turning to face him more fully. "Do you want to know what your father was really like? Not the legend, not the perfect memory that everyone's created, but the real James Potter? More than anything." Helena closed her eyes for a moment, and when she opened them again, they held the distant look of someone accessing deep memories. "I'll start with the first time I really noticed him, in our 3rd year. It was after a particularly difficult defense against the dark arts lesson where we'd been learning about boggarts. What happened? Your father's boggart turned into Lily, but not just Lily. It was Lily looking at him with complete disgust and contempt, telling him that he was everything she despised about pure-blood wizards. Helena's voice grew soft with remembered sympathy. The entire class saw it, and James was mortified. He tried to play it off as a joke, but I saw how shaken he was. Harry felt his understanding of his father shift slightly. He was afraid that Mum would never like him. He was terrified of it, Helena confirmed. And that fear drove a lot of his behavior, both good and bad. The showing off, the pranks, the way he hexed Severus, a lot of that was James trying to impress Lily while also trying to prove to himself that he was worth her attention. But it had the opposite effect. For years, yes. James was caught in this terrible cycle where his insecurity made him act in ways that pushed Lily further away, which increased his insecurity, which made him try even harder in all the wrong ways. Helena stood up and moved to the window, gazing out at the darkening street. "I watched him struggle with this for 3 years, Harry. I watched him become increasingly frustrated with himself, increasingly desperate to find a way to show Lily who he really was underneath all the posturing. What changed? Several things, all around the same time. First, Sirius Black nearly got Severus killed with that prank involving Remus's werewolf form. James saved Severus's life that night, but the incident shook him badly. Harry had heard vague references to this incident before, but never the full story. Why did it shake him? Because James realized that his rivalry with Severus had escalated to the point where people could die, Helena explained. He saw how his behavior, the pranks, the hexing, the constant antagonism, had contributed to an atmosphere where something truly terrible could happen. It forced him to look at himself honestly for the first time. And he didn't like what he saw. He was horrified by what he saw, Helena said simply. That's when he started changing, really changing. Not just modifying his behavior to try to impress Lily, but genuinely examining his motivations and trying to become a better person. Helena returned to the bed, settling back beside Harry with a thoughtful expression. The second thing that changed was that Lily finally called him out directly. Not in anger, not in disgust, but in genuine disappointment. She told him that she could see glimpses of the person he could be, but that he kept choosing to be someone smaller and meaner instead. What did Dad say? He didn't say anything. He just listened. And then he went away and thought about it for a very long time. Helena's voice grew warm with remembered admiration. That was one of the things I came to respect most about your father, Harry. When he was confronted with uncomfortable truths about himself, he didn't get defensive or make excuses. He listened, he reflected, and then he worked to change. How did he change? Slowly at first, then more dramatically as he gained confidence in his new approach, Helena said. He stopped hexing students in the corridors. He started standing up for people who were being bullied, even when there was no one around to witness his good deeds. He began using his natural leadership abilities to help rather than to show off. Helena's eyes grew distant with memory. I remember one incident in our 6th year where a group of Slytherin 7th years were tormenting a Hufflepuff 1st year. James intervened, but instead of humiliating the bullies publicly, which would have been his old approach, he handled it quietly and effectively, making sure the 1st year was safe without creating a spectacle. Mum saw this. Lily didn't see it, actually. That was what made it significant. James was learning to do the right thing because it was right, not because he wanted recognition or praise. Helena smiled, though I may have mentioned it to Lily later. I thought she should know that James was becoming the kind of person she'd always hoped he could be. Harry felt a surge of pride in his father, mixed with a growing understanding of how difficult change could be. When did Mum start to notice? It was gradual, Helena said. Lily was naturally suspicious of James's motives, after years of what she saw as manipulative behavior. But she started noticing small things. The way he treated younger students, how he handled disappointment, the fact that he stopped asking her out and started just treating her as a friend and equal. He stopped asking her out? That was perhaps the most important change of all, Helena confirmed. James realized that his constant pursuit of Lily was putting pressure on her and making it impossible for her to see him clearly. So he stopped. He told her that he respected her enough to accept her decision, and that he hoped they could at least be friends. And that's when she started to like him? Helena laughed softly. That's when she started to see him as a person, rather than an obstacle or an annoyance. The romantic feelings came later, but they grew out of genuine friendship and mutual respect. Harry tried to imagine his parents as teenagers, navigating the complex dynamics of attraction and personal growth. It was both reassuring and slightly overwhelming to realize that even his legendary parents had struggled with the same kinds of relationship challenges He was beginning to face himself. "Tell me about when they finally got together," he said. "It was just before Christmas holidays in our 7th year," Helena began, settling back against his headboard with the comfortable air of someone settling in for a long story. Lily had been studying for ancient runes in the library, and James was there working on his own assignments. They weren't sitting together, but they kept glancing at each other when they thought the other wasn't looking. Were they both interested by then? Oh, they were both completely smitten, Helena said with a grin. But neither one wanted to make the first move. Lily, because she was still processing her changing feelings and didn't want to seem fickle. James, because he was terrified of pushing her away again just when they were becoming real friends. So what happened? A group of Death Eater supporters attacked the library that evening, targeting Muggle-born students who were studying late, Helena said, her expression growing more serious. It was one of the first times the war had directly reached into Hogwarts, and everyone was caught off guard. Harry felt his stomach clench with familiar anxiety. Were people hurt? Several students were injured before the professors could respond, Helena confirmed. And in the chaos, Lily was separated from the main group and cornered by 2 7th-year Slytherins who had been radicalized by their family's Death Eater connections. What did Dad do? He didn't hesitate, Helena said, pride shining in her amber eyes. James saw what was happening and immediately put himself between Lily and the attackers. He was outnumbered, outgunned, and completely focused on protecting her rather than on his own safety. Did he win? He held them off long enough for help to arrive, Helena said. But Harry, what impressed me most wasn't his dueling skills or his bravery. It was what happened afterward. What do you mean? After the professors had dealt with the attackers and the injured students had been taken to the hospital wing, James found Lily sitting alone in an empty classroom, shaking with reaction to what had happened. Helena's voice grew soft with remembered emotion. And instead of trying to capitalize on what he'd done, instead of pointing out that he'd risked his life for her, he just held her. He let her cry. He told her she was safe, and he stayed with her until she felt ready to face the world again. Harry felt his throat tighten with emotion. That's when she knew she loved him. That's when she knew she could trust him completely, Helena said. The love had been growing for months, but that night she realized that James Potter would always put her safety and well-being ahead of his own interests, even ahead of his own life. What did she do? She kissed him, Helena said with a smile that was pure joy. Right there in that empty classroom, with her face still tear-stained and his robe still singed from battle. She kissed him and told him that she loved him, and that she was sorry it had taken her so long to see what had been right in front of her. Harry felt his chest warm with happiness for his parents, but also with a strange sense of recognition. The story Helena was telling felt familiar somehow, as if he were hearing an echo of something he'd experienced himself. What did Dad say? He said that waiting for her had been the easiest thing he'd ever done, because she was worth everything he'd had to learn about himself in order to become worthy of her love, Helena said softly. And then he told her that loving her had made him want to be the best version of himself, not just for her sake, but for his own. That's beautiful, Harry said quietly. They were beautiful together, Helena agreed. Not perfect. They still argued, still challenged each other, still had moments of doubt and frustration, but they were partners in every sense of the word. They brought out the best in each other while accepting each other's flaws and weaknesses. Helena was quiet for a moment, her gaze distant with memory. I think that's what real love looks like, Harry. Not the fantasy where 2 people never disagree or struggle, but the reality where 2 people choose each other every day, even when it's difficult. Harry found himself thinking about his growing feelings for Helena, about the way she challenged him intellectually while making him feel completely accepted, about how her presence made him want to be braver and kinder and more honest with himself. "Helena," he said carefully, not sure how to phrase what he wanted to ask. "Yes?" "When you talk about Mum and Dad's relationship, do you think it's possible for someone my age to understand that kind of love? To feel it?" Helena turned to look at him directly, her amber eyes searching his face with an intensity that made his heart race. "I think," she said slowly, "that love doesn't follow a timeline, Harry. I think some people are capable of feeling deep, lasting love much younger than others expect, especially when they've been forced to grow up quickly. Do you think Dad would understand if I—" Harry trailed off, suddenly afraid to voice what he was thinking. "If you what?" Helena asked gently. "If I had feelings for you," Harry said in a rush, his cheeks burning with embarrassment, but his voice steady with determination. "If I was starting to love you the way he loved Mum?" Helena was very still for a long moment, her expression unreadable. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft and careful. "Harry, your father's love for your mother grew over years of friendship, shared experiences and mutual growth. They were peers, equals in age and experience. But that's not the only kind of love that matters," Harry said, desperation creeping into his voice. "Is it? I mean, you've been watching over me for years. You know me better than anyone. You've seen me grow up, seen me change, seen me become who I am. Doesn't that count for something?" "It counts for everything," Helena said, and her voice was thick with emotion. "Harry, watching you grow into the remarkable young man you've become has been the greatest privilege of my life. But that's exactly why I need to be careful about how I respond to what you are feeling." "What do you mean?" Helena reached out and took his hand, her touch warm and reassuring, but also somehow final. "I mean that I love you too much to take advantage of the trust and affection you've developed for me. You're 13 years old, Harry. You're brilliant and mature and brave beyond your years. But you're still growing into yourself. The last thing I want is to influence your emotional development in ways that might not be healthy." Harry felt his heart sink, but also a stubborn determination rising in his chest. "So you're saying it could never happen? That no matter how I feel or how much I grow up, you'll always see me as too young? I'm saying that I care more about your well-being than about my own feelings," Helena said gently. "And right now, your well-being means having a guardian who puts your needs first, not a romantic partner who might prioritize the relationship over what's best for you." "But what about later?" Harry pressed. "When I'm older, when I've finished school, when I'm an adult making my own decisions?" Helena was quiet for a long moment, her amber eyes reflecting a complex mixture of love, hope, and uncertainty. "Later is a long time away, Harry. A lot can change between now and then. You might discover that what you're feeling now was just gratitude and attachment to someone who cared for you when you needed it most." "And if it's not?" Harry asked. "If what I'm feeling now grows into something deeper and more lasting?" "Then we'll face that together when the time comes," Helena said softly. "But Harry, I need you to promise me something." "What?" "I need you to promise that you'll let yourself be 13 years old, that you'll make friends your own age, explore relationships with people who are going through the same kinds of growth and discovery you are, and not limit yourself to what you're feeling right now." Harry wanted to protest, to argue that he didn't want relationships with people his own age, that what he felt for Helena was different from anything he'd ever experienced. But looking at her earnest expression, seeing the love and concern in her eyes, he found himself nodding reluctantly. "I promise to try," he said. "But Helena, I also need you to promise me something." "What's that?" "Promise me you won't disappear again. Promise me that no matter what happens with my feelings or yours, you'll stay in my life. Promise me I won't lose you." Helena's expression crumpled slightly, and she pulled him into a fierce hug that smelled of feathers and springtime. "Oh, Harry, you'll never lose me. No matter what the future holds, no matter how our relationship changes or evolves, I will always be part of your life. I promise you that." Harry clung to her, feeling safer and more loved than he ever had, while also wrestling with frustration and longing that he was too young to fully understand. It wasn't the answer he'd hoped for, but it wasn't a rejection either. It was Helena being honest about the complexity of their situation while promising him the one thing he needed most, that she wouldn't leave him. "Tell me more about Dad," he said after a moment, pulling back from the hug but staying close enough to feel her warmth. "I want to understand how he learned to wait for what he wanted." Helena smiled, recognizing the implicit question in his request. "Your father learned that the best things in life are worth waiting for, and that sometimes the waiting itself is what makes you ready to receive them." "How long did he wait for Mum?" "Years," Helena said honestly. "But Harry, he didn't spend those years just sitting around hoping things would change. He spent them becoming the kind of person who deserved Lily's love, working on himself, growing into his potential." "What did he do specifically?" "He learned to control his temper. He developed patience with people who frustrated him. He started thinking about consequences before acting on impulses." Helena's voice grew warm with remembered pride. "He became a leader who inspired rather than intimidated, a friend who supported rather than competed, a partner who listened rather than just waiting for his turn to speak." "And Mum noticed these changes?" "Lily noticed everything about James, even when she was pretending not to," Helena said with a smile. "But more importantly, James made these changes for himself, because he wanted to be a better person, not just because he wanted to win Lily's approval." Harry thought about this, trying to understand the distinction. "How can you tell the difference?" "By asking yourself why you want to change," Helena said. "If you're changing to manipulate someone into loving you, that's not real growth. But if you're changing because you recognize areas where you could be better, stronger, kinder, that's authentic transformation." "What if both are true?" Harry asked. "What if you want to be better for yourself, but also because you love someone and want to be worthy of them?" Helena studied his face with those perceptive amber eyes. "Then you have to be very careful to maintain the balance between those motivations. Love can inspire growth, but it shouldn't be the only reason for growth." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, both lost in thought. Finally, Harry spoke again. "Will you help me," he asked, "to grow into someone who could be worthy of whatever the future might hold?" "I'm already helping you with that," Helena said gently. "Every day, in every lesson, in every conversation we have about magic or life, or the choices you're facing. Growing into your full potential has always been the goal, Harry. Everything else is just details to be worked out later." "What do you think Dad would say about all this?" Harry asked. "About my feelings for you? About the situation we're in?" Helena was quiet for a long moment, considering the question seriously. "I think your father would understand better than most people what it feels like to love someone you're not sure you deserve," she said finally. "I think he would tell you that loving someone is always a risk worth taking, but that the best love is patient and selfless and willing to wait for the right time." "And what do you think Mum would say?" "Your mother would probably tell you that the most important thing is to be honest about your feelings without being ruled by them," Helena said with a small smile. "She would remind you that you have your whole life ahead of you, and that the person you're becoming is more important than any single relationship, no matter how significant it feels right now." Harry nodded, feeling a strange sense of peace settling over him. His parents' love story wasn't a simple fairy tale. It was a complex journey of growth, patience, and learning to love someone well. If what he felt for Helena was real and lasting, it would survive the waiting and growing that lay ahead. "Thank you," he said softly, "for telling me about them, for being honest with me about everything. I know it's not easy." "Loving you has been the easiest thing I've ever done, Harry," Helena said, echoing James's words about Lily. "Everything else is just details." As night fell over Little Whinging, Harry Potter lay in his bed, thinking about love and patience, and the long journey between recognizing your feelings and earning the right to act on them. His father had waited years for Lily's love, but he had used that time to become someone worthy of it. If Helena was right, if what lay between them was real and lasting, then Harry had time to grow into someone who could offer her the kind of love she deserved, mature, selfless, and strong enough to weather whatever challenges the wizarding world might throw at them. For now, it was enough to know that she would be there for that journey, just as she had been there for everything else. Whatever the future held, they would face it together. Chapter 8. Hearts in Conflict. Harry's 14th birthday dawned grey and drizzling, matching his mood as he sat by his bedroom window, watching the rain streak down the glass. A year had passed since Helena had first revealed herself to him, a year of magical training, ministry investigations, and the slow, careful development of something between them that neither quite knew how to name. The formal ministry inquiry had concluded months ago, with Helena being granted provisional guardianship status, though not without conditions and ongoing supervision that made Harry's teeth clench with frustration. She was permitted to remain with him, but under strict guidelines about his education, his social development, and their living arrangements that felt like a constant reminder that their relationship was viewed with suspicion by the wizarding world at large. Helena appeared in his doorway carrying a cup of tea and wearing the soft smile that always made his heart stutter. She looked exactly as she had the day she'd first transformed in front of him, young, beautiful, timeless in a way that sometimes made him forget she was anything other than a peer who happened to understand magic better than he did. "Happy birthday, dear one," she said softly, settling the cup on his bedside table and perching on the edge of his bed. "How are you feeling?" "Old," Harry said honestly, not turning from the window. "And young. And confused about pretty much everything." Helena's expression grew concerned. "What's troubling you?" Harry finally turned to face her, and the sight of her amber eyes, filled with gentle worry, made something twist painfully in his chest. "I've been thinking about what you said last year, about letting myself be 13, about exploring relationships with people my own age." And I tried," Harry said, his voice carrying a mixture of frustration and resignation. "I really tried, Helena. I spent time with other students at Hogwarts. I went to social events. I even let Hermione set me up on that disastrous date with Cho Chang." Helena's lips twitched with what might have been amusement, though she tried to hide it. "How did that go?" "Exactly as well as you'd expect," Harry said with a rueful laugh. "We had absolutely nothing in common. She spent the entire evening talking about Quidditch players I didn't care about, and I spent the entire evening thinking about how much more interesting my conversations with you are." "Harry, I know what you're going to say," Harry interrupted, standing up and beginning to pace around his small room. "I know you're going to remind me that I'm still young, that I should keep trying, that what I feel for you might just be gratitude or attachment or some kind of misplaced hero worship. Is that what you think I'm going to say?" Harry stopped pacing and looked at her directly. "Isn't it?" Helena was quiet for a long moment, her amber eyes studying his face with an intensity that made him feel like she was seeing straight through to his soul. "Harry, how old do you think I am?" The question caught him off guard. You look like you're in your early 20s, maybe 23 or 24. Chronologically, I'm 25, Helena said softly. "But Harry, I've been living as an owl for 4 years. I've been watching over you, feeling responsible for you, caring for you, like a mother or guardian, since you were 10 years old. In some ways, I feel much older than my chronological age. In other ways, I feel like I stopped aging emotionally the day I made that blood oath to your mother. Harry felt his heart rate increase. What are you saying? I'm saying that the age difference between us is more complicated than simple mathematics can capture, Helena said carefully. You're 14, but you've experienced things that would traumatize most adults. You've faced life-or-death situations, made impossible choices, carried burdens that no child should have to bear. In many ways, you're far more mature than most people your age. And you? Helena's smile was sad and complex. I'm 25, but I've spent 4 years living as an animal, focused entirely on caring for a child who wasn't my own. I haven't dated, haven't had relationships, haven't experienced most of the milestones that typically mark the transition to full adulthood. In some ways, I'm emotionally younger than my age would suggest. Harry felt something hopeful and terrifying unfurl in his chest. So what does that mean for us? It means that our situation is unique, Helena said gently. It means that normal rules and timelines don't necessarily apply to what we've experienced together. But Harry, it also means that we have to be extremely careful about how we proceed. Why? Because the wizarding world is watching us, Helena said, her voice taking on a harder edge. Because there are people who would use any perceived impropriety as an excuse to separate us permanently. Because the last thing I want is for you to suffer consequences for feelings that are natural and understandable given our circumstances. Harry moved closer to her, drawn by the vulnerability in her voice. What about what you want? Not what's safest, or most appropriate, or most likely to satisfy ministry bureaucrats. What do you actually want? Helena's breath caught, and for a moment she looked younger and more uncertain than he'd ever seen her. Harry, that's not a fair question. Why not? Because asking me what I want puts me in an impossible position, Helena said, standing up from the bed and moving toward the window. If I tell you the truth, I risk influencing your feelings in ways that might not be healthy for your development. If I lie, I'm being dishonest with someone I care about more than anyone else in the world. Harry followed her to the window, standing close enough that he could smell the faint scent of feathers and springtime that always seemed to cling to her hair. I'm asking you to trust me enough to tell me the truth. I'm asking you to treat me like someone mature enough to handle your honest feelings, not like a child who needs to be protected from reality. Helena turned to face him, and Harry was startled to see tears glistening in her amber eyes. The truth is that I love you, she said quietly. Not like a guardian loves a ward, not like a teacher loves a student, not like a substitute mother loves the child she's raising. I love you the way a woman loves a man, and it terrifies me. Harry felt his heart stop, then start again with a rhythm that seemed to shake his entire body. Why does it terrify you? Because you're 14 years old, Helena said, her voice breaking slightly. Because I've been responsible for your care and protection since you were a child. Because the power dynamic between us is inherently unequal in ways that could make any relationship exploitative, no matter how much we care about each other. But you do care about me, Harry said, stepping closer until they were almost touching. You do love me. I do, Helena whispered. And that's exactly why I'm terrified of what it might mean. Harry reached out and gently took her hands, marveling at how perfectly they fit in his. Helena, look at me. She met his eyes reluctantly, and Harry saw his own feelings reflected there, love and desire and fear and uncertainty, all tangled together in a way that was both beautiful and heartbreaking. I love you too, Harry said simply. I love your intelligence and your courage and your fierce loyalty. I love the way you challenge me to be better while accepting me exactly as I am. I love how you make me feel like I'm worth something, beyond my fame or my scar or my usefulness in a war. Harry, I'm not finished, Harry continued, his voice growing stronger with each word. I love that you knew my parents and can tell me stories about them that make them feel real instead of like distant legends. I love that you sacrificed years of your life just to keep a promise to a dead friend. I love that you're brave enough to face down ministry officials and powerful wizards to protect me, but gentle enough to hold me when I have nightmares. Helena was crying openly now, tears streaming down her face as she listened to his declaration. And I love, Harry said, bringing one of her hands to his lips and pressing a soft kiss to her palm, that you love me enough to worry about whether it's right or wrong or appropriate. Because that's exactly the kind of person I want to love, someone who puts my well-being ahead of her own desires. This is so complicated, Helena whispered. Everything in my life is complicated, Harry said with a slight smile. I'm used to it by now. The question isn't whether it's complicated. The question is whether it's real and whether it's worth fighting for. And you think it is? I know it is, Harry said firmly. Helena, I've spent a year trying to feel for other people what I feel for you. I've tried to convince myself that what's between us is just gratitude or misplaced attachment or some kind of psychological confusion caused by trauma. But it's not. What I feel for you is love. Real, deep, lasting love that has nothing to do with our circumstances and everything to do with who you are as a person. Helena studied his face for a long moment, searching for something in his expression. How can you be so certain? Because when I imagine my future, you're always in it, Harry said simply. Not as my guardian or my teacher or my protector, but as my partner. The person I want to share my life with. The person I want to face challenges with. The person I want to grow old with. You're 14, Helena said again, but her voice lacked conviction. I'm 14, and I've faced Voldemort 3 times and survived, Harry countered. I'm 14, and I've saved lives, and made life or death decisions, and lived through things that would break most adults. I'm 14, and I'm telling you that I know my own heart well enough to recognize real love when I feel it. Helena was quiet for a long time, her amber eyes never leaving his face. Finally, she spoke in a voice so soft he had to strain to hear her. What do you want from me, Harry? What are you asking for? I'm asking you to stop treating me like a child who doesn't know his own mind, Harry said. I'm asking you to trust that what I feel for you is real and lasting and worthy of being taken seriously. I'm asking you to consider the possibility that we might be able to build something together that respects both our feelings and the complexity of our situation. What would that look like? Harry had clearly thought about this extensively. It would look like honesty between us about what we're feeling. It would look like taking things slowly and being careful about boundaries and making sure we're both comfortable with every step. It would look like acknowledging that our relationship is unconventional, but not letting other people's opinions dictate our choices. And if people say I'm taking advantage of you, if they accuse me of grooming or manipulation, then they don't understand either of us, Harry said fiercely. Anyone who knows you, anyone who sees how you treat me, would know that you'd never hurt me or manipulate me. And anyone who knows me would know that I'm not some helpless victim being led astray by an older woman. Helena pulled her hands free from his and moved to sit heavily on his bed, her expression troubled. Harry, even if I accepted everything you're saying about our feelings and your maturity, there are still practical problems. The Ministry is already watching us closely. If they had any hint that our relationship had become romantic, they'd try to separate us, Harry finished grimly. I know, which is why we'd have to be careful and discreet until I'm of age. That's 3 years away. I know. 3 years of hiding how we feel, of pretending our relationship is something it's not, of living under constant scrutiny and suspicion. If that's what it takes, Harry said simply. Helena looked up at him with an expression that was part admiration and part despair. You're asking me to risk everything, my freedom, my reputation, my ability to protect you, for the possibility of a romantic relationship with someone who might feel completely different about me in 3 years. You're right, Harry said, surprising her. I'm asking you to risk everything. Just like you asked me to risk everything when you revealed yourself to me. Just like I risk everything every time I trust you with my life, my heart, my future. He sat down beside her on the bed, close enough that their knees touched. Helena, love always requires risk. My parents risked everything to be together during a war. You risked your sanity and your humanity to keep a promise to my mother. I'm asking you to risk your comfort and safety to give us a chance to see what we might be together. And if I'm not brave enough, Helena asked quietly, if I decide that the risks are too great and the potential consequences too severe? Harry felt his heart clench with fear, but his voice remained steady. Then I'll accept your decision and be grateful for whatever relationship you're comfortable with. I'd rather have you in my life as my guardian and teacher than not have you at all. But you'd be hurt. I'd be heartbroken, Harry admitted. But I'd survive. I've survived worse things than unrequited love. Helena reached out and cupped his face gently, her amber eyes searching his green ones. You really mean all of this, don't you? This isn't just teenage infatuation or rebellion or a desire to feel more grown up than you are. Helena, I've never been more serious about anything in my life, Harry said, leaning into her touch. I love you. Not the idea of you, not what you represent, not the safety or comfort you provide. I love you, your mind, your heart, your courage, your kindness, your strength, your vulnerability, all of it. I love you too, Helena whispered, and Harry felt his world tilt on its axis. I love you so much that it scares me. I love you in ways that I know I shouldn't, in ways that complicate everything I thought I knew about appropriate boundaries and responsible guardianship. Then why are we fighting it? Harry asked softly. Because love isn't always enough, Helena said, though her thumb was tracing gentle circles on his cheek. Because sometimes the most loving thing you can do is step back and consider what's best for the other person, even if it breaks your heart. And what do you think is best for me? Helena was quiet for a long moment, her eyes never leaving his face. I think, she said slowly, that you're mature enough and smart enough to make informed decisions about your own life. I think that treating you like a child when you've proven yourself to be capable of adult reasoning and adult choices would be disrespectful and counterproductive. So I think we should try, Helena said, her voice barely above a whisper, carefully, slowly, with constant attention to boundaries and consequences. But yes, I think we should try. Harry felt joy explode through his chest like a physical force. Really? Really? Helena confirmed, smiling through her tears. Though I have conditions. Anything. First, we tell no one. Not your friends, not the Weasleys, certainly not anyone connected to the Ministry or Hogwarts. Our safety depends on discretion. Harry nodded eagerly. Of course. Second, we take this very slowly. No rushing into anything physical or emotional that either of us isn't completely ready for. We check in with each other constantly about comfort levels and boundaries. I understand. Third, if at any point either of us feels like this is becoming unhealthy or inappropriate, we step back and reevaluate. No arguments, no guilt, no trying to convince the other person to change their mind. Agreed. And fourth, Helena said, her expression growing serious again. "You continue to develop relationships with people your own age. You don't use our relationship as an excuse to isolate yourself from your peers or to avoid the normal social development that teenagers should experience." Harry wanted to protest this condition. He had no interest in relationships with other people. But looking at Helena's earnest expression, he found himself nodding. "I'll try." "Good," Helena said, and her smile was radiant with love and hope and terror. "In that case—" She leaned forward, slowly and deliberately, giving him plenty of time to pull away if he wanted to. Harry didn't want to. He met her halfway, his eyes closing as their lips touched in a kiss that was gentle and sweet and absolutely perfect. It lasted only a moment before Helena pulled back, her cheeks flushed and her breathing slightly uneven. "Happy birthday, Harry," she whispered. "Best birthday ever," Harry said, grinning so widely his cheeks hurt. "We should probably talk about practical things," Helena said, though she seemed reluctant to break the spell of the moment. "How we're going to handle this when you go back to school, what our relationship will look like day to day, how we're going to navigate the challenges ahead." "Can we do that later?" Harry asked, reaching for her hand again. "I just want to sit with this for a while. The fact that you love me, that we're going to try, that I don't have to pretend anymore, that you're just my guardian." Helena squeezed his hand gently. "We can sit with it for a while," she agreed. "But Harry, you need to understand that this is going to be difficult. There will be times when we can't show affection publicly, when we have to pretend our relationship is something other than what it is, when we'll be frustrated by the limitations placed on us." "I know," Harry said. "But Helena, I've been in love with you for months while thinking it was completely hopeless. Compared to that, any relationship with limitations feels like a gift. What about when people question our living arrangement? When they make snide comments about inappropriate relationships or suggest that I'm taking advantage of you?" Harry's expression hardened with determination. "Then they'll discover that I'm very good at defending the people I love. Let them talk, Helena. Let them whisper and speculate and judge. They don't know us, they don't know our story, and their opinions don't matter. They might try to separate us. Then we'll fight them," Harry said simply. "Together. And if that doesn't work, we'll find a way to be together anyway. Helena, I've fought Voldemort and survived. I'm not going to be defeated by ministry bureaucrats and social disapproval." Helena laughed, and the sound was full of love and amazement. "How did I end up in love with someone so young and so brave?" "You fell in love with someone who learned courage from watching you," Harry said seriously. "Someone who learned what love looked like by seeing how far you were willing to go to protect the people you care about." "Is that what happened?" "That's exactly what happened," Harry confirmed. "You showed me what it meant to love someone selflessly, completely, without reservation. And then you were surprised when I fell in love with you for it." Helena was quiet for a moment, her amber eyes distant with thought. "Your father would understand," she said finally. "What do you mean?" "Your father fell in love with someone who was brilliant and brave and completely out of his league," Helena said with a soft smile. "He spent years thinking he wasn't worthy of her, that the age and maturity gap between them was too great to overcome. But he was wrong." "He was wrong," Helena confirmed. "Just like you might be wrong about being worthy of me." Harry started to protest, but Helena held up a hand to stop him. "Or," she continued with a mischievous grin, "I might be wrong about being worthy of you. After all, you're the one who's faced down dark wizards and saved lives and shown courage that most adults will never possess." "Helena, the point is," she said, leaning forward to rest her forehead against his, "that love isn't about being worthy. It's about choosing each other, every day, despite our flaws and fears and the obstacles the world puts in our way. And you choose me? I choose you, Helena confirmed, and kissed him again, soft and sweet and full of promise. As evening fell over Little Whinging, Harry Potter sat holding hands with the woman he loved, planning a future that was uncertain and complicated and absolutely perfect. He was 14 years old and in love with his guardian, facing challenges that would test them both in ways they couldn't yet imagine. But for the first time in his life, he wasn't facing those challenges alone. He had Helena, brilliant, brave, devoted Helena, and she had chosen to love him despite every practical reason why she shouldn't. Whatever came next, they would face it together. And for Harry Potter, that was more than enough. Chapter 9. The Dark Truth. The attack came at 3 a.m. on a moonless Tuesday in late September, shattering the careful peace that Harry and Helena had built over the months since their relationship had begun. Harry jerked awake to the sound of Helena's sharp intake of breath, her hand already on his shoulder, as she transformed from owl to human form in one fluid motion. "Death Eaters," she whispered, her amber eyes wide with alert terror as she reached for her wand. "At least 6 of them, surrounding the house. They're not here for a casual visit, Harry." Harry was instantly awake, adrenaline flooding his system as he grabbed his glasses and wand from the bedside table. Through his bedroom window, he could see dark figures moving with predatory purpose across the Dursleys' pristine lawn, their faces hidden behind the skull masks that had haunted his nightmares for years. "How did they find us?" he whispered, his mind racing through the protective wards that Dumbledore and the Order had placed around Privet Drive. "I don't know," Helena said grimly, pulling on a dark cloak over her sleeping clothes. "But Harry, they're not moving like they're here to capture you. They're moving like they're hunting something specific." As if summoned by her words, a cold, high voice rang out across the suburban silence, carrying easily through the night air, despite its almost conversational tone. "Helena Whitmore," the voice called, and Harry felt his blood turn to ice as he recognized the unmistakable sound of Lord Voldemort himself. "The Owl Woman. How fascinating that you've chosen to reveal yourself after all these years." Helena went rigid beside him, her face draining of color. "He knows," she breathed. "Merlin's sake, he knows who I am." "Come out, my dear," Voldemort continued, his voice carrying the mock politeness that made it infinitely more terrifying than any scream. "Bring the Potter boy, of course, but do not think to hide from me. I have such interesting plans for you both." "How?" Harry demanded in a fierce whisper. "How does he know about you?" Helena's expression was grim as she moved to peer carefully through the edge of his bedroom curtains. "Peter Pettigrew," she said simply. "He was in our year at Hogwarts. He would have known me before I disappeared from the wizarding world." Harry felt his stomach clench with fear and fury. "Wormtail recognized you. He must have seen me during one of our training sessions, or perhaps when the ministry officials came to investigate," Helena said, her voice tight with controlled panic. "It doesn't matter how he figured it out. What matters is that Voldemort now knows that Lily Potter's best friend has been protecting her son, and he intends to use that knowledge against us. What do we do?" Helena turned from the window, and Harry was struck by the transformation in her expression. Gone was any trace of the gentle teacher and loving guardian he'd come to know. In her place stood someone who looked like a seasoned warrior, her amber eyes hard with determination, and her entire bearing radiating dangerous competence. "We fight," she said simply. "And then we run. Helena, there are 6 Death Eaters out there, plus Voldemort himself. Harry," her voice cut through his rising panic with calm authority, "do you trust me? With my life? Then listen carefully. I'm about to show you magic that your mother developed specifically for this scenario. Combat spells designed to be used by a guardian, and ward working in perfect synchronization." Helena moved to Lily's hidden chest, pulling out a journal bound in deep red leather that Harry had never seen before. Your mother knew this day might come. She prepared for it. The house shuddered around them as powerful magic struck the protective wards, and Harry could hear the Death Eaters outside beginning to chant in unison, their voices weaving a counterspell designed to bring down Dumbledore's protections. "We don't have much time," Helena said, flipping rapidly through the journal to find the spells she needed. "Harry, these techniques require absolute trust and perfect magical synchronization between partners. Can you do that?" "Yes." "Good." She found the page she was looking for and held it where Harry could see the intricate spell diagrams. "This is called the Guardian's Bond. It links our magical cores temporarily, allowing us to cast spells together that would be impossible individually." Harry studied the diagrams quickly, his mind absorbing the theoretical framework with the enhanced comprehension that Helena's training had developed. "It's like what Mum did to protect me, but weaponized." "Exactly. The protection becomes offense. The bond becomes a weapon." Helena extended her hand toward him, palm up. "Are you ready?" Harry took her hand without hesitation, feeling the familiar warm tingle of their magical connection intensify into something that was almost painful in its intensity. The spell activations were complex, requiring perfect timing and absolute emotional synchronization. "Concordia Magica," they spoke in unison, and Harry gasped as he felt Helena's magic surge into his own, doubling his power while creating a feedback loop that seemed to triple hers. The sensation was overwhelming, like being struck by lightning while swimming in warm honey. Harry could feel Helena's emotions as clearly as his own, her fierce protectiveness, her battle-ready determination, her absolute refusal to let any harm come to him. "How do you feel?" Helena asked, her voice carrying a strange, harmonic quality that suggested the bond was affecting their speech as well. "Like I could take on the world," Harry said honestly, marveling at the way his magic felt both doubled and perfectly controlled. "You might have to," Helena said grimly, as the protective wards finally shattered with a sound like breaking glass. The first Death Eater through Harry's bedroom window was a large man in a skull mask who moved with the confident swagger of someone accustomed to terrorizing helpless victims. He was not prepared for what met him. Helena's first spell hit him before he'd fully cleared the windowsill, a binding curse that wrapped him in magical rope while simultaneously draining his magical energy to feed back into the Guardian's bond. Harry followed up with a banishing charm that sent the bound Death Eater flying back through the window with enough force to take out two of his companions who were climbing toward the roof. "Impressive," came Voldemort's cold voice from the garden below. "The owl woman has claws after all." Helena moved to the window, her wand trained on the dark figures below, while her free hand maintained contact with Harry to keep their bond active. "3 down, 3 to go," she said, with grim satisfaction. "Plus Voldemort himself," Harry reminded her, moving to cover the bedroom door in case Death Eaters came up the stairs. "Your mother's protections are still warding him from direct contact with you," Helena said. "He'll send the others first, try to wear us down before he risks engaging directly." As if to prove her point, the remaining Death Eaters abandoned stealth in favor of a direct magical assault. Curses began flying through the windows, killing curses, torture curses, and experimental dark magic that Harry didn't recognize, but that made his magical senses recoil in horror. Helena deflected them with shields that gleamed silver-white in the darkness, her movements flowing and precise as she wove protective barriers around them both. But Harry could feel the strain the defense was putting on their joined magic, and he knew they couldn't maintain this level of protection indefinitely. "We need to go on the offensive," he said, ducking, as a purple curse sizzled through the air where his head had been. "Together," Helena agreed. "On my mark, we hit them with everything we have. Your mother's research included some very creative applications of the Patronus charm." Harry felt his lips curve in a fierce grin. "The stag and the owl?" "The stag and the owl," Helena confirmed. "Ready?" Harry nodded, raising his wand as Helena did the same. they spoke the incantation together, their voices harmonizing in a way that made the air around them shimmer with silver light. Expecto Patronum Multiplicitus. Instead of Harry's usual stag, what erupted from their joined wands was something magnificent and terrible, a massive silver creature that combined the best aspects of both their patronuses. It had the powerful body and antlered head of Harry's stag, but with great sweeping wings like Helena's owl, and eyes that blazed with protective fury. The guardian Patronus dove through the bedroom window, with a cry that was part roar, part screech, and entirely terrifying. Harry watched through their magical connection as it tore through the remaining Death Eaters like an avenging angel, its silver light burning away their dark magic and sending them fleeing in genuine terror. Remarkable. Voldemort's voice carried a note of what might have been admiration. Lily's research has borne interesting fruit, but surely you don't think a bit of creative light magic will be enough to save you. Helena gripped Harry's hand tighter, and he felt her magic surge with desperate determination. Harry, we have to go, now. The Patronus bought us time, but not much. Where? Dumbledore prepared safe houses for this scenario, Helena said, pulling him toward the door. But first we have to get past Voldemort himself. They made it to the first floor before the front door exploded inward in a shower of splinters and dark magic. Voldemort stepped through the wreckage like a pale nightmare, his red eyes gleaming with malevolent satisfaction. Running so soon? He asked conversationally. But we've only just been introduced. Helena Whitmore, daughter of the pure-blood Whitmore line, blood traitor, and most interestingly, the woman who sacrificed her humanity for a promise to a dead mudblood. Don't you dare call her that, Harry snarled, his magic flaring with protective rage. Ah, young Potter! Voldemort's gaze shifted to Harry, and even through the Guardian's bond, Harry felt the familiar chill of the Dark Lord's attention. How you've grown, and how interesting that you've found yourself a protector who loves you enough to die for you. Just like your mother. I won't let you hurt him, Helena said, positioning herself between Harry and Voldemort, despite the obvious futility of the gesture. Hurt him! Voldemort laughed, the sound like ice cracking. My dear woman, I have no intention of hurting him. He is far too valuable alive. But you... His red eyes focused on Helena with predatory interest. You present fascinating possibilities. What do you mean? I mean that young Potter here has developed quite an attachment to his guardian, Voldemort said with mock pleasantness. An attachment that makes you a perfect weapon against him. Tell me, Harry, what would you do to save her life? How many people would you betray? How many principles would you abandon? Harry felt cold dread settle in his stomach as he understood Voldemort's plan. You want to use her against me? I want to use love against you, Voldemort corrected, just as your mother's love was ultimately what destroyed my previous body. Love, I've learned, is both your greatest strength and your most exploitable weakness. You're wrong, Harry said fiercely. Love doesn't make us weak, it makes us stronger. Does it? Voldemort asked, raising his wand toward Helena. Shall we test that theory? The killing curse that erupted from Voldemort's wand was unlike any Harry had ever seen. Not the familiar green light, but something darker and more terrible, designed not just to kill, but to cause maximum anguish to those who loved the victim. Helena threw herself sideways, pulling Harry with her, but they both knew it was futile. The curse was too fast, too powerful, aimed with too much precision. The spell never reached them. Instead, it struck an invisible barrier that flared brilliant gold, and Dumbledore's voice filled the house with calm authority. That is quite enough, Tom. The headmaster materialized in the hallway between Harry and Voldemort, his usual grandfatherly demeanor replaced by something that reminded Harry powerfully of the most dangerous wizard in the world that Voldemort himself feared. Dumbledore, Voldemort hissed, his red eyes narrowing with frustration. Your timing is, as always, impeccable. I have been monitoring this location since young Harry's birthday, Dumbledore said calmly, never taking his eyes off the Dark Lord. Did you really think I would leave him unprotected? Protected by your pet phoenix and a handful of Order members? Voldemort's voice carried dismissive contempt. I think not. Protected by love, Tom, Dumbledore said simply. The same force that destroyed your body 14 years ago. The same force that flows between Harry and Helena, making them stronger together than either could be alone. Harry felt Helena's hand tighten in his as she realized what Dumbledore was saying. You knew, she whispered. You knew about us. I have known about you since the day you first transformed into Hedwig, Dumbledore said, without turning around. Did you think you could live in my school for 3 years without my knowledge? The question was never whether I knew about your deception, my dear, but whether I would choose to act on that knowledge. And why didn't you? Helena demanded. Because Harry needed you, Dumbledore said simply. Because you were keeping him alive and helping him grow in ways that no one else could. And because I learned long ago not to interfere with the bonds that love creates, even when they complicate my carefully laid plans. Voldemort's expression twisted with rage. Enough of this sentiment, old man. Stand aside. I think not, Dumbledore said, and suddenly the air around him began to shimmer with power that made even Voldemort take an involuntary step backward. You came here hoping to find 2 vulnerable targets separated from their allies. Instead, you find a bonded pair protected by magic you cannot understand and defenses you cannot penetrate. This is not over. No, Dumbledore agreed calmly. But it is over for tonight. With a sound like tearing fabric, Voldemort disapparated, leaving behind only the acrid smell of dark magic and the echo of his rage. Harry collapsed against the wall, the adrenaline that had sustained him through the fight leaving him shaky and drained. Helena was beside him immediately, checking him for injuries while maintaining the magical bond that had allowed them to fight as one. Are you hurt? She asked urgently, her hands running over his arms and chest looking for wounds. I'm fine, Harry said, though his voice shook with reaction. Helena, that was incredible. The magic we did together, I've never felt anything like it. That was your mother's legacy, Helena said softly. The research she did, the spells she developed, all of it designed to protect you if this day ever came. And it worked, Harry said wonderfully. We held off Voldemort himself. With considerable help, Dumbledore interjected gently, turning to face them. Though I must say, the Guardian's bond was impressively executed for your first attempt. Helena stood slowly, her amber eyes wary as she faced the headmaster. Professor Dumbledore, I assume you have questions. I have questions, yes, but not accusations, Dumbledore said kindly. Helena Whitmore, you have protected Harry Potter for 4 years with a dedication that rivals his mother's own sacrifice. Any questions I have are born of curiosity and concern, not judgment. What happens now? Harry asked, pulling himself to his feet with Helena's help. Now, you both disappear, Dumbledore said firmly. Voldemort knows about Helena, knows about your connection, and knows that he can use one against the other. You cannot remain here, and you cannot return to Hogwarts until we can establish new protections. Where will we go? I have prepared safe houses for this contingency, Dumbledore said, pulling a small piece of parchment from his robes. This is the location of one known only to myself, and a very few trusted Order members. You will be protected there while we determine our next course of action. Helena took the parchment, reading the address with growing surprise. This is Evan's property. Lily's family estate. Her grandparents' cottage, to be precise, Dumbledore confirmed. Warded with magic that predates Voldemort's rise to power, protected by blood magic that will recognize Harry as family, and hidden under charms that have kept it secret for 50 years. How long will we have to stay there? Harry asked, Until I can convince the Ministry that your safety requires extraordinary measures, Dumbledore said, or until we can find a way to eliminate the threat entirely. Harry felt Helena's hand slip into his, her fingers intertwining with his own in a gesture of mutual support and determination. "What about school?" Harry asked. "What about my friends?" "Your education will continue under Helena's guidance," Dumbledore said. "As for your friends, they will be told that you are safe but cannot be contacted for security reasons. It is not ideal, Harry, but it is necessary."